They set a Montblanc pen beside the untouched wine, my mother flashing her practiced charity-gala smile. She called signing away my inheritance the noblest act a daughter could perform. Convinced she had cornered a naive sheep in this Chicago restaurant. However, they made two fatal mistakes. I did not come alone, and I possess proof of their massive debt. Tonight I am not signing a waiver. I am signing the death warrant on their greed forever. My name is Jade Ellison, and for the last 5 years, I have worked as a senior risk analyst at Vortexia Dynamics. My job description is deceptively simple. I look at complex systems, corporate mergers, volatile market trends, international trade agreements, and I identify the fault lines before the earthquake hits. I am paid a very comfortable salary to see the disasters that others are too optimistic or too greedy to notice. It is a profession that requires a certain level of cynicism, a trait that my father, Arthur, always told me was a survival mechanism, not a character flaw. So, when my phone vibrated on a Tuesday afternoon displaying the name Mother for the first time in 3 years, I did not feel a surge of familial warmth. I felt the distinct, cold prickle of a red flag going up. The invitation was for dinner at the Gilded Cage, in Chicago. Restaurants come and go with the seasons, but the Gilded Cage is different. It is an institution buried deep within the architecture of the Loop. A place where the lighting is always dim, the upholstery is velvet, and the menu has no prices, because if you have to ask, you are in the wrong zip code. It is not a place for family reunions. It is a place for mergers, acquisitions, and silent capitulations. I arrived exactly 7 minutes late. It was a calculated move, in a negotiation. The person who waits is the person who holds the lower hand. I handed my coat to a silent attendant and followed the hostess down a corridor lined with dark mahogany and oil paintings of men who looked like they owned railroads in the 19th century. The air smelled of truffle oil and expensive cologne. "Your party is in the Onyx Room, Miss Ellison," the hostess said, her voice a practiced whisper. The Onyx Room, a private VIP suite. My mother was not just buying me dinner. She was setting a stage. When the heavy oak doors swung open, the first thing I noticed was the silence. It was an artificial, vacuum-sealed silence that money buys to keep the noise of the real world out. The second thing I noticed was the cast of characters. I had expected my mother, Victoria. I had anticipated a monologue about why she had not called in 36 months. I had not expected an audience. Victoria sat at the head of the table. She looked impeccable, of course. She was wearing a cream-colored silk blouse that probably cost more than my first car, and her hair was swept up in a chignon that defied gravity. To her right sat Lucas, her husband of 6 years. Lucas was a man who always looked like he had just stepped out of a tanning salon. His skin a shade of bronze that did not exist in nature, especially not in a Chicago winter. Next to him were his 2 children from a previous marriage, holding their phones under the table, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of social media. And then, there was the anomaly. In the far corner of the room, seated slightly away from the family cluster, was a man I did not know. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, wearing a charcoal suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life. He had a laptop closed in front of him and a glass of sparkling water that he was not drinking. He looked like a shark waiting for the chum to hit the water. "Jade." Victoria stood up, her arms opening wide as if we were in the final scene of a romantic comedy. She floated toward me, enveloping me in a cloud of Chanel No. 5. "Oh, look at you. You look professional." It was a compliment wrapped in a critique. I was wearing a sharp navy blazer and trousers. Practical and authoritative. In Victoria's world, women were decorative. In my world, we were functional. "Hello, Mother," I said, allowing the hug but not returning it with any real pressure. I stepped back, my eyes scanning the room. I didn't realize this was a group event. "Oh, stop it," she laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "It's just family. Lucas was dying to see you, and the kids have grown so much. Haven't they?" I nodded at Lucas. who gave me a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Jade, good to see you. You're looking well. I hear Vortexia is doing big things." "We manage," I said, taking the seat opposite my mother. The table was set with enough silverware to perform a surgery. There were no menus. "Who is our guest?" I gestured to the man in the corner. Victoria waved a hand dismissively, but I saw the micro-tension in her jaw. "Oh, that's Sterling. He's an old friend of Lucas's. He was just in the neighborhood and we insisted he join us for a drink. He won't be staying for dinner. Don't worry, darling. He's practically family." I looked at Sterling. He nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin. "Miss Ellison, a pleasure?" He did not look like a friend who had dropped by. He looked like a retainer. His briefcase was sitting on the empty chair next to him, and he kept one hand near it, protective and alert. I have sat across from enough corporate legal teams to recognize the posture. That was not a social call. That was billable time. The waiters materialized from the shadows to pour wine. It was a vintage Bordeaux, deep and red like arterial blood. I covered my glass with my hand. "Water, still." "No ice," Victoria sighed, picking up her wineglass. "You always were so rigid. Jade, loosen up. We are celebrating." "Celebrating what?" I asked, unfolding my napkin. "Family," she said, her eyes glistening with sudden, summoned moisture. "Reconnection and, well, moving forward." The appetizers arrived tiny, intricate sculptures of seafood that looked too precious to eat. As we ate, Victoria launched into her performance. She talked about their recent trip to the Amalfi Coast, about the renovations they were doing on the lake house, about the charity gala she was organizing for stray greyhounds. It was a relentless stream of affluent signaling. She wanted me to know that she was happy, wealthy, and thriving. But I am a risk analyst. I look for the cracks. I noticed that Lucas was drinking his wine too fast. I noticed that the diamond bracelet on my mother's wrist was one I recognized from my childhood, but the setting looked different, lighter. Perhaps replaced with cubic zirconia while the real stones were sold off. I noticed that despite the talk of renovations, she was wearing a dress from a collection released 4 years ago. "It is just so hard to find good contractors these days," Victoria lamented, picking at her lobster. "We wanted to redo the pool house in Italian marble, but the quotes are simply extortionate. Not that we can't afford it, obviously, but it is the principle of the thing. Everyone tries to take advantage of you when they know you have means." "It's a burden," Lucas chimed in, his voice thick with false modesty. "Heavy is the head that wears the crown." "Right, Jade?" I sliced a piece of cucumber with surgical precision. "I wouldn't know. I live in a condo and drive a Volvo." "That's exactly what we worry about," Victoria said, leaning forward. The air in the room shifted. The temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. "You work so hard. Jade, you live such a small life. We want more for you, especially now." "Now," I repeated. "After your father," she said. The name hung in the air. Arthur. My father had been dead for 6 months. When he died, the world lost a genius in agricultural biotechnology. I lost the only person who ever understood me. My mother lost nothing, because she had discarded him 15 years ago when he was just a man with a wild idea and a garage full of petri dishes. But now that he was gone, and the patents for his drought-resistant crops were generating royalties that rivaled the GDP of small nations, she was suddenly very interested in his legacy. "It was such a tragedy," she whispered, dabbing at her dry eyes with a linen napkin. "I know we had our differences, but Arthur was a brilliant man. It breaks my heart to think of him all alone at the end." She paused, waiting for me to comfort her. I remained silent. "But he left a mess, didn't he?" Lucas interjected, leaning his elbows on the table. "Great man. Terrible with paperwork. We heard the estate is a nightmare of taxes and bureaucracy." I took a sip of my water. "Actually, Dad was very organized. His lawyers are handling everything efficiently." "Lawyers will bleed you dry," Lucas said, shaking his head. "They don't care about family. They care about their percentage. That's why we wanted to talk to you. Jade, we want to protect you. Here it comes. I thought, the pivot. Protect me from what? I asked. From the sharks, Victoria said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You are young, Jade. You are single. You have no experience managing that kind of wealth. $2 billion is not just money. It is a target on your back. People will come out of the woodwork. They will try to manipulate you, trick you, steal from you. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. I manage risk for a living. Mother, I said calmly, I think I can handle a bank account. It's not just a bank account, she snapped, her mask slipping for a fraction of a second before she smoothed it back into place. It is a complex portfolio of assets, and the taxes. Jade, the inheritance tax will destroy half of what he built if you aren't careful. We have been talking to experts, real experts. She signaled to the corner. Sterling, the old friend, stood up. He picked up his briefcase and walked to the table. He did not smile. He placed the leather case on the table, moving the flower arrangement aside with an arrogant disregard for the decor. Miss Ellison, Sterling said, his voice smooth like polished gravel. My name is Richard Sterling. I am a senior partner at Sterling, Holt, and Associates. Your mother and Mr. Lucas asked me to look into the structure of your father's estate purely out of concern for your financial well-being. I have my own counsel, I said. Of course you do, Sterling said, opening the briefcase. But standard probate lawyers are not equipped for wealth of this magnitude. They follow the book. We write the book. He pulled out a thick stack of documents. The paper was heavy, bound with a blue cover. He slid it across the pristine white tablecloth until it rested inches from my plate. What is this? I asked, looking at the title page. Family Asset Restructuring and Preservation Agreement. It is a solution, Victoria said, reaching out to cover my hand with hers. Her palm was clammy. It is a way to keep the money safe. Sterling has drafted a trust, a family trust. If you sign the assets over to this entity, the tax liability drops to near zero over the next 10 years. We can manage the investments, handle the headaches. And you? You can just live your life. You can quit that stressful job. You can travel. You can be free. I looked down at the document. I didn't need to read the fine print to know what it was. It was a cage, a gilded cage, just like this restaurant. You want me to transfer the control of my father's estate, I said slowly, to a trust managed by whom? By the family, Lucas said, puffing out his chest. I have years of experience in real estate and investment. Your mother has a great eye for philanthropy. We would be the trustees. You would be the beneficiary. Of course, you would get a generous monthly allowance. Allowance, I repeated. The word tasted like ash. $20,000 a month, Victoria said quickly. Tax-free. Jade, that is more than you make in a year at that depressing office. You could buy a house. You could meet someone nice. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the desperation behind the Botox. I saw the fear in Lucas's eyes as he watched my hand hovering near the pen. They thought I was stupid. Or maybe they just thought I was desperate for their approval. They didn't know that 3 hours ago. I had run a comprehensive credit check on both of them. I knew about the third mortgage on their house in Lake Forest. I knew that Lucas's development company was currently being sued by 4 different contractors for non-payment. I knew that they were drowning in credit card debt, trying to maintain a facade of wealth that had evaporated years ago. They didn't want to protect me. They wanted to consume me. They needed my father's money to plug the holes in their sinking ship. My father had warned me. He had told me that money changes people. But that wasn't quite right. Money doesn't change people. It unmasks them. I looked at the document again. Thorough, I said. It is the best option, Sterling said, uncapping a fountain pen. It was a Montblanc. He placed it next to the document. Time is of the essence, Miss Ellison. The probate window is closing. If we don't file this structure by the end of the month, the IRS will take 40%. 40% of something is better than 100% of nothing, I murmured. Excuse me, Sterling frowned. Nothing, I said, looking up at my mother. So, let me get this straight. I sign this, and you take control of everything, the patents, the stocks, the cash, and in return, I get an allowance and a family. Victoria squeezed my hand. You get your mother back. Jade, we can be close again, like we used to be. Before everything got so complicated. It was a masterful performance. If I were the girl I was 10 years ago, the girl who cried herself to sleep wondering why her mother didn't want her, I might have signed it just to feel the warmth of her hand, but I wasn't that girl. I was Jade Ellison, senior risk analyst, and I had identified the threat. It sounds very tempting, I said, my voice flat. Then sign, Lucas urged, a little too eagerly. Let's get the boring stuff out of the way and order dessert. They have a chocolate souffle here that is to die for. I reached for the pen. I felt the air in the room tighten. Every pair of eyes was fixed on my fingers. Victoria held her breath. Lucas leaned in. Even the bored teenagers looked up from their phones. I picked up the heavy black pen. I felt the weight of it. It felt like a weapon. There is just one thing, I said, pausing with the nib hovering over the signature line. What is it, darling? Victoria asked, her voice trembling with anticipation. I noticed something interesting about the structure of this trust, I said, flipping the page casually. Though I wasn't really reading it, I was just letting them sweat. It lists the trustees as having absolute discretion over distributions. That means you could technically cut off my allowance at any time, for any reason. Is that standard? Mr. Sterling? Sterling cleared his throat. It is standard language for asset protection, Miss Ellison, to protect the beneficiary from predatory external influences. But surely, with your own mother as trustee, that is not a concern. Right, I said, because family protects family. Exactly, Victoria breathed. I looked at the pen again, then I looked at the glass of water, then I looked at the door. You know, I said, putting the pen down, I think I need a moment. This is a big decision. Maybe I should have my lawyer look at it. There is no time, Lucas snapped, his face flushing red. Jade, don't be difficult. We are trying to help you. Do you think we want to be doing this? We are sacrificing our time to save your inheritance. Sacrifice, I said. That is a strong word. I looked at my watch. It was time. Actually, I said, I think my lawyer might already be here. Victoria frowned. What? You said you came alone. I said I brought one person, I corrected her, though I hadn't said that out loud yet. I had only thought it. Or rather, I invited someone to join us for dessert. The heavy oak doors opened again. The silence of the room was broken by the sharp, rhythmic click of heels on the hardwood floor. They all turned. Sterling looked annoyed. Lucas looked confused. Victoria looked terrified. But I just smiled. The trap had been sprung. But not the one they thought. The woman who walked in was not a waitress. She was carrying a briefcase that looked far more worn and far more dangerous than Sterling's. She didn't look like she belonged in the gilded cage. She looked like she belonged in a courtroom where people went to prison. My mother's grip on my hand tightened until it was painful. Jade, she hissed. What is this? This, I said, pushing the contract back across the table toward Sterling, is the due diligence phase. While the air in the private dining room grew heavy with the suffocating scent of expensive lilies and desperation, my mind drifted away from the polished mahogany table. I looked at the Montblanc pen lying on the starch-stiff tablecloth, but I was no longer seeing the weapon my mother wanted me to use to sign away my future. Instead, I was seeing a grease-stained wrench resting on a workbench made of plywood and cinder blocks. I was seeing my father. The contrast between the room I was currently sitting in and the world Arthur Ellison had built for me could not have been more stark. To the people in this restaurant, Power looked like Italian suits, black credit cards, and the ability to speak to waiters without making eye contact. To my father, power looked like a drought-resistant soybean seed that could survive a sub-Saharan summer. I was 12 years old when the fault line in my parents' marriage finally cracked open and swallowed our family whole. I remember the day clearly, not because it was traumatic, but because it was the day the noise finally stopped. For years, our house had been a battleground of conflicting ideologies. My mother, Victoria, was a creature of optics. She believed that success was something you wore, something you drove, and something you posted on the internet for strangers to envy. My father, on the other hand, was a man who forgot to cash his paychecks because he was too busy thinking about chlorophyll structures. He was an eccentric genius, though at the time, Victoria just called him a failure. He worked as a researcher for a mid-level agricultural firm during the day, but his real life began after dinner. He would retreat to the detached garage, which smelled permanently of potting soil, motor oil, and the cheap frozen hamburgers he liked to microwave. While other fathers were playing golf or watching football, Arthur was crossbreeding corn stalks under grow lights he had rigged up with duct tape. I remembered sitting on a stool in the corner of that garage, doing my homework while he muttered to his plants. He would hold up a petri dish to the light, his glasses sliding down his nose, and say things that sounded like poetry to me. He told me that plants were the most honest things in the universe because they never pretended to be anything other than what they were. They sought the light, they drank the water, and they grew. They did not lie about their net worth. They did not smile when they hated you. Victoria hated that garage. She hated the dirt under his fingernails. She hated that he drove a rusty Ford pickup truck that rattled when it went over 40 miles per hour. But mostly, she hated that he was content. The day she left, she stood in the kitchen in her tennis whites, holding a glass of Chardonnay. Lucas was waiting in the driveway in a convertible that cost more than my father made in 3 years. Lucas was everything Arthur was not. He was loud, he was shiny, and he was in real estate. He sold houses to people who could not afford them, locking them into loans they would never pay off. And he called it business. Victoria called it ambition. She told my father that she was leaving because she needed a man who wanted to go somewhere in life. She looked around our modest kitchen, with its peeling wallpaper and the stack of scientific journals on the counter, and sneered. She said she was tired of waiting for a ship that was never going to come in. She said she deserved the finer things, the country clubs, the vacations in Aspen. She told him that he was small, and that his life was small, and that she refused to shrink any longer to fit inside it. My father did not yell. He did not beg. He just looked at her with a calm, scientific curiosity, as if she were a specimen reacting predictably to a stimulus. He told her she was free to go, but that I was staying. Victoria did not fight him for custody. I think, deep down, she knew I was already too much like him. I was not a decorative accessory she could dress up in matching outfits. I was a variable she could not control. So she got into the convertible with Lucas, and they drove away in a cloud of exhaust and expensive perfume. For the next 6 years, it was just Arthur and me. Those were the best years of my life. We lived simply. We ate dinner at the kitchen counter, usually tacos or those microwaved burgers he loved so much. We spent our weekends hiking in the state park, looking for native wildflowers. He taught me that money was a tool, like a hammer or a shovel. You use it to build things. He would say, "You do not worship the hammer. You do not let the hammer tell you who you are. If you define yourself by the number in your bank account, you are empty. Jade, and empty things are easily broken." He never seemed bitter about Victoria when I asked him why he let her treat him like he was worthless. He just shrugged. He told me that some people are like ornamental ivy. They need a strong wall to climb on, but eventually, they tear the mortar apart. He said he was just happy he was still standing. Then came the year I turned 18. It happened on a Tuesday, much like the day my mother left. But this time, the arrival in the driveway was not a convertible, but a courier van. My father had been working on a specific gene sequence for wheat that could thrive in high salinity soil. It was the kind of thing that could save millions of people from starvation. He had patented it quietly, without fanfare, and then offered it to the market. A global pharmaceutical and agricultural conglomerate bought it. They did not just buy it, they fought a bidding war for it. When the dust settled, the final sale price was $2 billion. I remember coming home from my graphic design class at the community college to find my father sitting on the porch of our small house, drinking a can of root beer. The rusty Ford truck was parked in its usual spot, dripping a little oil onto the concrete. He looked exactly the same as he always did, wearing a flannel shirt with a hole in the elbow and pair of jeans that had seen better days. He handed me a piece of paper. It was a deposit slip. The number on it was so long it looked like a mistake. It looked like a phone number. $2 billion. I stared at him, my mouth open. I asked him what we were going to do. I asked if we were going to move. I asked if he was going to buy a castle. He looked at me and smiled. That slow, crinkly smile that reached his eyes. He said we were going to order pizza and maybe get the transmission fixed on the truck. That was it. That was Arthur Ellison. He became one of the richest men in the state overnight, and he did not change a single thing about his daily existence. He still worked in the garage. He still ate cheap burgers. He still wore the flannel shirt. But the world around us changed instantly. The news broke 3 days later, and 2 days after that. Victoria came back. She showed up on our doorstep with a casserole dish covered in aluminum foil and a look of tender concern that was so fake it almost made me laugh. She was wearing a dress that was slightly too short and perfume that was slightly too strong. She told Arthur that she had been doing a lot of thinking. She said that she realized she had made a mistake, that family was the most important thing, and that she wanted to work things out. She looked at the peeling wallpaper in the hallway, not with disgust, as she had before, but with the hungry eyes of a woman measuring for drapes. Lucas was nowhere to be seen. I later learned that his real estate empire was already crumbling even back then, and he had encouraged her to go. They saw my father not as a human being, but as a lottery ticket they had discarded too soon. I watched from the top of the stairs, my heart pounding, terrified that my father would take her back. I was afraid that his loneliness would outweigh his logic. But I had underestimated him. My father was a scientist. He dealt in facts, not fantasies. He stood in the doorway, blocking her path. He did not invite her in. He looked at the casserole, then at her, and his voice was incredibly gentle when he spoke. He told her that he was glad she had realized the importance of family. He said he hoped she found happiness, but then he told her that the woman who left because he had no ambition could not return just because he now had capital. He said that their experiment had concluded years ago, and the data showed they were incompatible. He closed the door in her face. He did not slam it. He just closed it. That was the moment I realized that my father was the strongest man I would ever know. After that, the training began. Arthur knew that the money made him a target, but more importantly, he knew it made me a target. He knew that he was old and that his heart was not as strong as his mind. He knew that one day I would be left alone with the wolves. So, he stopped teaching me just about plants, and he started teaching me about predators. Every Sunday afternoon, we would sit at the kitchen table, but instead of biology textbooks, we had spreadsheets. He hired forensic accountants and retired judges to come to the house not to manage his money, but to teach me how to manage it. I learned how to read a balance sheet before I learned how to legally drink alcohol. I learned how to spot a shell company. I learned the difference between an asset and a liability, not just in finance, but in people. He taught me that charm is often a mask for incompetence. He taught me that urgency is the hallmark of a scam. He taught me that if someone is trying to sell you something, they are doing it for their benefit, not yours. And then, he built the fortress. He spent the last 3 years of his life constructing the Ellison Trust. It was not a standard family trust. It was a masterpiece of legal engineering, designed with the specific purpose of keeping people like Victoria and Lucas out. He worked with the sharpest legal minds in the country to create a document that was virtually unbreakable. He explained the terms to me one rainy afternoon, tapping his finger on the thick binder. He told me that upon his death, the assets would not pass to me directly in a way that could be easily accessed or transferred. Instead, they would lock into a structure where I was the sole beneficiary, but with layers of protection that required specific validation for any major changes. He looked at me with serious eyes, his face illuminated by the lightning outside. He said that when he died, people would come for me. He said they would use guilt. He said they would use the word family like a weapon. He warned me that my mother would try to leverage her biological connection to pry open the vault. He told me that the trust was his final act of parenting. It was his way of holding my hand when he was no longer there to do it physically. The most important clause in the trust was regarding the transfer of authority. He made sure that no one, absolutely no one, could be added as a trustee or gain power of attorney over the assets without a rigorous, independent vetting process that included a forensic audit of the applicant's finances. He knew Victoria and Lucas had skeletons in their closet. He knew they would never pass a background check. He had rigged the game so that the only way they could win was if I voluntarily surrendered. He told me to never surrender. "Jade," he had said, his voice raspy, "you are the guardian of this legacy." Not because of the money, but because of what the money represents. It represents freedom. It represents the ability to say no. Do not ever let them take your no away from you. Sitting in the gilded cage, surrounded by crystal and deceit, I felt the ghost of his hand on my shoulder. I looked at Victoria, who was watching me with that predatory hopefulness, waiting for me to pick up the pen again. I looked at Lucas, sweating in his tight suit. They saw a 29-year-old girl who they thought was lonely. They did not see the 12-year-old girl who had learned to survive on frozen burgers and integrity. They did not see the student who had spent her Sundays dissecting tax codes. They did not see the daughter of Arthur Ellison. My father had spent his life studying how things grow in hostile environments. He had bred me to be resilient. He had modified my DNA with lessons of steel and skepticism. I took a sip of water, washing away the bad taste of the wine I hadn't even drunk. The memory of the garage was fading, replaced by the sharp, high-definition reality of the trap they had tried to set. But the warmth of my father's pride remained. He had prepared me for this exact moment. He had predicted this scene, right down to the fake smiles and the expensive suits. The flashback ended, but the lesson did not. I was not just fighting for money. I was fighting for the man who drove a rusty Ford and changed the world. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was about to make him very, very proud. The call that changed the trajectory of my life did not come with a siren or a scream. It came with the polite, hesitant voice of a park ranger from Starved Rock State Park on a Sunday evening. He asked me if I was the daughter of Arthur Ellison. When I said yes, the silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the air out of the room. He told me that they had found a man matching my father's description on the trail near the canyon rim. He had sat down on a bench overlooking the river, perhaps to catch his breath or admire the view. And his heart had simply stopped beating. There was no pain. The ranger assured me it was a massive coronary event. The lights just went out. My father died as he had lived quietly, surrounded by nature, and completely alone. The days that followed were a blur of administrative grayness. I moved through them like a ghost, signing release forms, speaking to the coroner, and choosing a casket. I selected a simple pine box, unvarnished and clean. It smelled of raw wood, a scent that reminded me of his garage, of the sawdust that used to coat the floor while he built shelves for his seedlings. It was the only choice that made sense. The funeral was held 3 days later at a small chapel near the cemetery. I had invited only a handful of people, his old colleagues from the lab, the neighbor who watered his plants when he was away, and Marcus, his attorney and oldest friend. I wanted it to be a reflection of him, humble, honest, and brief. But my mother had other plans. Victoria arrived 20 minutes late. ensuring that every head turned as she made her entrance. She swept into the chapel wearing a black dress that was more appropriate for a red carpet in Milan than a funeral in Illinois. It was cut low in the back and high in the front, paired with oversized sunglasses that she did not remove, even inside the dim building. Lucas trailed behind her like a loyal golden retriever, wearing a suit that shimmered under the chapel lights. Her stepchildren, Mia and Ethan, looked bored and uncomfortable, checking their watches as if waiting for a movie to end. Victoria marched to the front row, right next to me. She smelled of lilies and aggressive entitlement. She began to weep before she even sat down loud, heaving sobs that echoed off the wooden pews. It was a performance. It was theater. She threw herself over the pine casket, wailing about her beloved Arthur and the tragedy of a life cut short. I stood there, stiff and dry-eyed, watching her desecrate his memory with her fabrication. She had not spoken to him kindly in 15 years. She had mocked his dreams and abandoned him when he was struggling. Yet here she was, auditioning for the role of the grieving widow, undoubtedly hoping that the audience included the executor of the estate. "He looks so peaceful," she choked out, clutching a handkerchief she had clearly bought for the occasion. "We had so much unfinished business, so much love left to give." I looked at Marcus, who was sitting on the other side of the aisle. His face was made of granite. He knew. We both knew. When the service ended, Victoria tried to orchestrate a reception at a nearby hotel. She talked loudly about hosting a celebration of life with catering and an open bar. I shut it down immediately. I told the funeral director that everyone was going home. The look Victoria gave me could have peeled paint, but she quickly masked it with a pitying smile. "Poor Jade," she told the gathered guests. "Grief makes people irrational. She doesn't know what she is doing." But I knew exactly what I was doing. I was burying my father, not launching a PR campaign. The reading of the will took place the following Tuesday. The setting was the polar opposite of the funeral. Marcus's office was located in a pre-war building downtown, a space filled with the smell of old paper, leather, and dust. It was a serious room for serious business. Victoria and Lucas arrived early. They had positioned themselves on the leather sofa, holding hands. Victoria had toned down the wardrobe slightly, opting for a navy suit that screamed, "Responsible matriarch." When I walked in, she patted the empty space next to her. "Sit with us, darling," she cooed. "We are in this together." I sat in the armchair on the opposite side of the room. "I am fine here." Marcus entered a moment later, carrying a thick file. He did not smile. He sat behind his massive oak desk, adjusted his spectacles, and looked at us over the rim. "The last will and testament of Arthur James Ellison," Marcus announced, his voice steady. "Dated 6 months ago. I drafted this document personally, and Mr. Ellison was of sound mind and body at the time of signing." Lucas shifted in his seat. I could see him doing the mental math. They knew the number. Everyone knew the number. $2 billion. Even a fraction of that would solve all their problems. They were expecting a peace offering. They were expecting that Arthur, in his final days, had softened. They were expecting that he had remembered the good times before the divorce. Marcus began to read. He went through the standard legalese quickly, confirming the appointment of executors and the payment of debts. Then, he got to the distribution of assets. To the University of Illinois Department of Agricultural Sciences, I bequeath the sum of $100 million to establish a scholarship fund for underprivileged students. Victoria nodded, looking benevolent. "That is lovely. Arthur always cared about education, a very generous tax write-off." "To the Global Food Security Initiative," Marcus continued, "I bequeath the sum of $100 million. Lucas tapped his foot. $200 million gone, but that still left $1 billion. $800 million. Plenty to go around. "The remainder of the estate," Marcus read, and the room went deathly still. "Including all cash reserves, stock portfolios, real estate holdings, and future royalties derived from the Ellison patents, is to be placed into the Ellison Master Trust." And the beneficiaries? Lucas asked, his voice tight. The sole beneficiary of the Ellison Master Trust, Marcus said, looking directly at me, is Jade Elizabeth Ellison. Victoria froze. Her smile stayed plastered on her face, but her eyes went blank. She waited. She was waiting for the and. Is that it? Lucas asked, his voice cracking slightly. What about spousal support? What about the family? Arthur and Victoria have been divorced for over a decade, Marcus said calmly. There is no legal obligation for spousal support. The divorce settlement was finalized years ago. As for the rest of the document, Marcus turned a page. Arthur was very specific. I will read his own words, included as a clause in the will. Marcus cleared his throat. To my ex-wife, Victoria, I leave nothing. You chose your path when you walked out of our home because it was not grand enough for you. You have the life you built. I am leaving mine to the person who helped me build it. The silence that followed lasted only a second before it was shattered by a screech that sounded like metal grinding on glass. That is a lie. Victoria shot up from the sofa, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The benevolent widow was gone. The woman who had sneered at my father's garage was back. He was senile. He didn't know what he was writing. You manipulated him. She pointed a manicured finger at me. You poisoned him against me. You spent years whispering in his ear, playing the perfect little daughter while I was trying to give you space. Mrs. Ellison, please sit down, Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. I will not sit down, she screamed. This is fraud. This is undue influence. Arthur loved me. He told me he still loved me. He never said that, I said quietly. It was the first time I had spoken. He never mentioned you at all. You little witch, Lucas spat, standing up to join his wife. His face was turning a dangerous shade of purple. We know the law. You can't just cut a spouse out of $1 billion fortune. Ex-spouse, Marcus corrected sharply. And yes, you can, in this state, and under these circumstances. The will is ironclad. We have video evidence of the signing. We have 3 witnesses. We have a psychiatric evaluation performed on the day of the signing to prove competency. Arthur knew exactly what you would do. He prepared for it. We will sue, Lucas threatened, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus. We will tie this up in probate for 10 years. We will drag your name through the mud. We will prove that Jade took advantage of a lonely old man. You are welcome to try, Marcus said, closing the file. But I must warn you, the estate has set aside a very aggressive litigation fund specifically for this purpose. If you contest this will, we will countersue for legal fees, and we will win. You will walk away with less than nothing. Victoria stared at me. Her chest was heaving. Jade, she said, her voice shifting suddenly from rage to a desperate, wheedling tone. Jade, honey, listen to me. This isn't right. You know it isn't right. That is too much money for one person. It is heavy. It is dangerous. We just want to share the burden. We are family. I looked at her. I saw the greed vibrating under her skin like a parasite. The meeting is over, I said. Victoria stared at me for another long moment. Then, realizing that the audience was not buying her performance, she grabbed her purse. This isn't over, she hissed. You think you have won, but you have no idea what it takes to keep that kind of money. You will come crawling back to us. She stormed out. Lucas closed on her heels. The door slammed so hard the diplomas on the wall shook. When the room was finally quiet, Marcus let out a long sigh and removed his glasses. He looked tired. I am sorry you had to see that, Jade, he said. I expected it, I replied. Dad told me. Marcus opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a sealed white envelope. It had my name written on it in my father's familiar, messy handwriting, the scrawl of a man who spent more time holding a trowel than a pen. He wanted you to have this, Marcus said, to be read after the dust settled. I took the envelope. My hands were trembling slightly. I waited until I was back in my car, parked in the garage beneath the building. before I opened it. The letter was short. My dearest Jade, if you are reading this, I am gone, and the circus has likely already begun. I am sorry for the noise. I tried to keep my life quiet, but money has a way of amplifying the worst parts of human nature by now. You have seen the numbers. It is a lot. It is enough to change the world, or enough to destroy a person. I am not worried about you, though. I watched you grow up. I watched you learn. You have a spine of steel, my girl. You get that from your grandmother, not me. But listen to me closely. When I am gone, the vultures will come. They will not look like monsters. They will look like friends. They will look like family. They will come with smiles and sad stories and outstretched hands. They will try to make you feel guilty for what you have. Do not let them. You do not owe anyone a piece of your life just because they share your DNA. You earned your place in this world. Protect it. Build something real. I am so proud of you, not for what you will do with the money, but for who you are without it. Love, Dad. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the letter. I didn't cry. I felt a cold resolve settling into my bones, hardening like concrete, in the weeks that followed. The transfer of assets began. It was a massive, complex operation, moving billions of dollars into the structures Arthur had created. But outwardly, my life did not change. This was the part that confused everyone. I did not quit my job at Vortexia Dynamics. I showed up at 9 o'clock the next morning, sat at my desk, and opened my spreadsheets. I continued to live in my 2-bedroom condo in the city. I drove my 3-year-old Volvo. I bought my coffee from the same shop on the corner. The tabloids tried to find a story, but there was nothing to see. Billionaire heiress goes to work is a boring headline. Eventually, the paparazzi lost interest, but I knew who was watching. Victoria and Lucas went silent. After the explosion in Marcus's office, they vanished. There were no angry texts, no lawsuits filed, no screaming voicemails. It was a radio silence that lasted for 1 month, then 2, then 3. To an outsider, it might have looked like they had accepted defeat. It might have looked like they had moved on. But I am a risk analyst. I know that in nature, silence is not peace. Silence is what happens right before the predator strikes. I knew they were not gone. They were regrouping. They were desperate. They were drowning in debt. And they had just watched their lifeline begin to slip away. I spent those 3 months preparing. I tightened my digital security. I hired a private investigation firm to monitor their financial movements. I watched them watching me. I knew they would come back. I just didn't know how. So when the invitation to dinner at the Gilded Cage finally arrived, 3 months and 4 days after the funeral, I wasn't surprised. I didn't feel fear. I felt the cold satisfaction of a player who sees the opponent make exactly the move they had predicted. They thought they were luring me into a trap. They didn't know that I had spent the last 3 months building a cage of my own, and I was just waiting for them to walk into it. To understand why I walked into the Gilded Cage with a loaded weapon in the form of a forensic audit, you have to understand the 3 months that preceded that dinner. You have to understand that silence from people like Victoria and Lucas is never actually silence. It is just the sound of the tide pulling back before the tsunami hits. The war did not start with a scream. It started with roses. 3 weeks after the funeral, I arrived at my office at Vortexia Dynamics to find my desk invisible. It was buried under an avalanche of white roses. There were dozens of them, spilling out of crystal vases that looked far too expensive for a corporate cubicle environment. My colleagues, serious people who spent their days modeling catastrophic weather events and market crashes, were staring, in our line of work. A display like this usually meant someone had died or someone was trying to apologize for a scandal. I picked up the card. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with embossed gold lettering. To my darling daughter, I am so sorry for the misunderstanding. Let us start over. Mommy loves you. Mommy. She had not called herself that since I was 6 years old. I felt a wave of nausea. This was not an apology. This was a territorial marking. It was a public declaration of ownership. She was signaling to my world, my professional, controlled, independent world, that she still held the lease on my identity. I called the reception desk and told them to donate the flowers to the hospital down the street. I told them that if anything else arrived from that sender, it was to be rejected at the door. But the damage was done. The whisper network in the office had already started. Did you see the flowers? Her mother must be so sweet. Why is Jade so cold? That was the opening salvo of the charm offensive. 2 days later, Lucas called. He did not call my cell phone. He called my direct line at work, a number that was not listed publicly. I watched the digits flash on the screen, a knot tightening in my stomach. I answered, my voice professional and detached. Jade Ellison speaking. Jade. It is Lucas, his voice boomed, overly jovial, vibrating with a forced paternal warmth that made my skin crawl. I hope I am not catching you at a bad time. I just wanted to touch base. We were worried about you working so hard. I am in the middle of a report. Lucas, I said. What do you want? Straight to business. Just like your father. He chuckled, though the sound had a nervous edge. Look, Jade, I know things got heated at the lawyer's office. Emotions were high. Grief does crazy things to people, but your mother and I have been talking, and we are worried about your liquidity. My liquidity, I repeated flatly. Exactly, he said, shifting into his salesman mode. You have all these assets now, but they are just sitting there, stagnant. I have an opportunity. Jade, a once-in-a-lifetime development project in the West Loop. Luxury condos, mixed-use retail, high yield. I could get you in on the ground floor. We could make your money work for you. It is what Arthur would have wanted for you to be smart with his legacy. The audacity was breathtaking. He was invoking the name of the man he had replaced to swindle the daughter he had ignored. Lucas, I said, my assets are managed by a diversified trust strategy that outperforms the S&P 500. I do not invest in speculative real estate, and I certainly do not invest with family. I am trying to help you. His voice cracked, the jovial mask slipping. You are sitting on a gold mine, and you are letting it gather dust. You are being selfish. Jade, we are offering you a seat at the table. I have my own table, I said. Do not call this number again. I hung up. My hand was shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, simmering rage. They were probing the perimeter. They were testing the fences to see where the weak points were. Then, the tactics shifted. If charm didn't work, they would try fear. It started with the digital ghosts. One Tuesday morning, I received a notification from our IT department. Someone had attempted to log into my work email account 5 times between 2 and 3 in the morning. The IP address was masked through a cheap VPN, but the intent was clear. They were looking for something dirt, leverage, or maybe just a way to spy on the inheritance details. Then came the phone calls. My personal cell phone would ring at odd hours midnight, 3 in the morning, 4:15. When I answered, there was no one there, just silence. Sometimes, I thought I could hear breathing. Sometimes, faint classical music playing in the background. It is a classic psychological warfare tactic. Disruption of sleep leads to cognitive decline. It makes you paranoid. It makes you weak. I stopped answering. I set my phone to do not disturb, but the feeling of being watched followed me out of the digital world and into the physical one. One rainy Thursday evening, I came home to my condo building in the Gold Coast. It is a secure building with a 24-hour doorman and a reputation for privacy. But as I walked through the revolving glass doors, I saw her. Victoria was sitting in one of the lobby armchairs, looking small and fragile. She was not wearing her usual armor of designer suits. She was wearing a soft gray cardigan and no makeup. She looked 10 years older. It was a costume, of course, but it was a very convincing one. As soon as she saw me, she stood up, her eyes filled with instant tears. "Jade," she sobbed, her voice loud enough to echo off the marble walls. The doorman, a kind man named Henry, who had known me for years, looked up with concern. Two neighbors waiting for the elevator turned to watch. "Mother," I said, stopping 10 feet away. "What are you doing here?" "I just wanted to see you," she cried, rushing toward me with her hands outstretched. "I miss you so much. Why won't you talk to me? Why are you shutting me out? I am your mother." She tried to hug me. I took a step back. To the audience, it looked like a cruel rejection. It looked like a heartless daughter turning away a grieving widow. "Please leave," I said quietly. "I just want us to be a family again," she wailed, falling to her knees, actually falling to her knees on the lobby floor. It was Shakespearean. "Your father is gone. Jade, we are all that is left. Don't be so cruel. Please, just let me love you." I saw the neighbors whispering. I saw the look of judgment in their eyes. They didn't know about the insults in the lawyer's office. They didn't know about the 15 years of neglect. They just saw a crying mother and a stone-faced daughter. "Henry," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest, "please escort Mrs. Ellison out. She is not on the guest list." Victoria looked at me with a flash of pure venom that only I could see, right before she buried her face in her hands and let out another sob. Henry gently guided her out, but the damage was done. I rode the elevator up alone, feeling the weight of 20 pairs of eyes burning into my back. That night, the digital smear campaign began. I have a Google alert set for my name. It is standard practice in my industry. That night, it lit up like a Christmas tree. It started in the comment sections of local society blogs. Anonymous users posting stories about ungrateful children who abandoned their sick parents after receiving windfalls. Then it moved to Facebook groups. Someone had posted a blind item in a prominent Chicago socialite group about a certain tech analyst who was letting her mother live in squalor while she sat on a billion-dollar fortune. They were careful not to use my full name to avoid libel laws, but the details were specific enough. They mentioned my job title. They mentioned the neighborhood I lived in. She refused to even hug her mother in the lobby. One comment read, "Heartless. Money reveals character." Another wrote, "Shame on her." I sat in my apartment, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating the dark living room. I felt isolated. I felt besieged. This is what gaslighting does. It tries to replace your reality with someone else's fiction. It tries to make you question your own memories. Was I being cruel? Was I being unreasonable? No. I closed the laptop. I took a deep breath. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. My father had taught me that when the data is noisy, you look for the underlying trend. You look for the motive. Why now? Why this urgency? Why the theatrics? People do not humiliate themselves in public lobbies unless they are desperate. The next morning, I walked into the security office at Vortexia Dynamics. The head of security, a former intelligence officer named Mike, owed me a favor after I flagged a vendor fraud scheme the previous year. "I need a deep dive," I told him, handing him a slip of paper with Lucas and Victoria's names and social security numbers. "Financials, legal, everything. Dig until you hit bedrock." Mike didn't ask questions. He just nodded. 24 hours later, he dropped a file on my desk. "You were right to be suspicious," Mike said, his voice low. "It is a bloodbath." I opened the file. The numbers stared back at me, stark and undeniable. Lucas was not just in debt, he was insolvent. His real estate empire was a house of cards built on leverage and predatory loans. He had 5 ongoing lawsuits for breach of contract. He had maxed out every credit line he had, but the real kicker was the gambling debt. There were records of wire transfers to offshore accounts linked to known unregulated casinos. There were promissory notes to private lenders, the kind of lenders who do not use collection agencies, but use baseball bats. $50 million. That was the hole they were in. They needed $50 million immediately. Not in a year. Not in 6 months. Now. And then I saw the mortgage documents for my mother's house. It was in foreclosure. The bank had sent the notice 2 weeks ago. They were days away from losing the roof over their heads. Everything clicked into place. The flowers, the calls, The scene in the lobby, it was not about love, it was not about family, it was about survival. They were drowning. And I was the only life raft in the ocean. That was when the email arrived. It popped into my inbox at 4 p.m. on a Friday. The subject line was simply, "Please read. Important." I opened it. It was from Victoria. "My dearest Jade, I know you are angry. I know I have made mistakes. But I'm writing this because I do not have much time left to make things right. I went to the doctor last week. They found a mass. It is early, stage 1, but with my history. Well, one never knows. The uncertainty has made me realize what is truly important. I do not want your money. I do not care about the will. I just want to see my daughter. I want to clear the air before I start treatment. Please, Jade, grant a sick old woman one final wish. Let us have dinner, just us, a family meeting. I promise, no drama, just a chance to say the things we should have said years ago. Love, Mom." I stared at the screen. A lump formed in my throat. For a split second, just a fraction of a second, the little girl inside me wanted to believe her. Cancer. The word carries a weight that can crush any defense mechanism. What if it was true? What if I ignored this and she died? But then I looked at the file on my desk. I looked at the $50 million debt. I looked at the timeline. The foreclosure notice, the gambling debts. I picked up the phone and called a contact I had at the regional medical database, a perk of working in risk analysis for insurance sectors. I asked for a verification. It was a breach of protocol, but I did not care. 10 minutes later, the text came back. No records of oncology visits, no biopsies, clean bill of health as of her last physical 2 months ago. She was lying about dying. She was using the specter of cancer as a crowbar to pry open my wallet. Something inside me snapped. It was the final thread of attachment I had to the woman who gave birth to me. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I did not feel sad anymore. I felt cold. I felt sharp. They wanted a meeting. I would give them a meeting. I replied to the email. "Mother, I will meet you. Tuesday at 7, the Gilded Cage. Jade." I hit send. Then I picked up the file Mike had given me. I called Marcus, my father's lawyer. "Jade," Marcus answered. "Is everything all right?" "No," I said. "But it is about to be. I need you to clear your schedule for Tuesday night, and I need you to bring Elias." Elias, the forensic auditor. Marcus sounded confused. "Why?" "Because," I said, looking at the picture of my father on my desk, the one of him smiling in his dirty flannel shirt. "I am going to a family reunion, and I want to make sure I bring the right kind of gifts." I spent the rest of the weekend preparing. I treated it like a hostile corporate takeover. I organized the evidence. I printed the bank statements, the loan defaults, the foreclosure notices. I created a dossier that detailed every lie, every manipulation, every financial crime. I was not walking into that restaurant as a victim. I was not walking in as a daughter. I was walking in as the executioner of their deception. When Tuesday came, I dressed in my navy blazer. I put on my armor. I looked in the mirror and saw my father's eyes staring back at me. They were kind eyes, but they were not naive. They lured me in with a lie about death. I was going to show them the truth about their life. The psychological terror campaign had been designed to break me, to make me feel small and guilty and compliant, whatever they thought they were doing. It had backfired. They hadn't broken me. They had sharpened me. I grabbed my bag. I checked my phone. One last anonymous call from a blocked number. I didn't answer. I just smiled. "I will see you soon," I whispered to the empty room. I walked out the door, ready to end it. The atmosphere in the Onyx room had shifted from awkward social posturing to a cold, predatory silence. The waiter had cleared the untouched appetizers, sensing perhaps that the appetite in the room had nothing to do with food and everything to do with the stack of papers resting on the white tablecloth. Richard Sterling, the lawyer whom my mother had introduced as an old friend, adjusted his silk tie. He looked like a man who was used to getting his way, a man who viewed the law not as a set of rules, but as a set of suggestions to be navigated around. He placed his hand on the document, his fingers manicured and pale. "Jade," he began, his voice dropping to that confidential, professional register that costs $1,000 an hour. "Let us dispense with the pleasantries. We are here because we care about the longevity of the Ellison legacy. The document before you is a family preservation trust. It is a standard instrument used by ultra-high net worth individuals to mitigate exposure." "Exposure to what?" I asked, keeping my hands in my lap. "To volatility," Sterling said smoothly. "To estate taxes, to bad actors. The proposal is simple. You transfer 60% of the liquid assets and the patent portfolio into this trust. The trust is domiciled in South Dakota for tax advantages. It protects the principal." "And who manages the principal?" I asked. "A board of trustees," Sterling said. "Naturally, to keep it within the circle of trust. Your mother and Mr. Lucas have volunteered to serve as the primary managing trustees. You, of course, would be the primary beneficiary." He slid the document toward me. "It is a win-win. Miss Ellison, you shed the administrative burden, and the capital remains protected." I reached out and opened the folder. The text was dense, single-spaced, and deliberately obtuse. It was written in a language designed to make smart people feel stupid. But I deal with risk assessment for a living. I read contracts like this every day. I skipped the preamble and went straight to the definitions of authority. I read quietly for 2 minutes. The room was so silent I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. "This is interesting," I said, not looking up. "Clause 14, Section B. The trustees shall have absolute and sole discretion regarding the timing and amount of any distributions to the beneficiary." I looked up at Lucas. He was watching me with a tightness around his eyes. "And here," I continued, flipping the page. "Clause 21. The beneficiary waives the right to audit the trust's investments or demand an accounting of expenses incurred by the trustees." I closed the folder and placed my hand on top of it. "This isn't a trust," I said, my voice calm but carrying across the table. "This is a donation. You are asking me to hand over 60% of my father's life's work, over $1.2 billion, to an entity that I cannot control, cannot audit, and cannot leave. And in exchange, I have to ask Lucas for permission if I want to buy a car." "You are twisting the words," Lucas snapped, his face flushing a mottled red. "It is standard language. It gives us the flexibility to invest aggressively without you having to sign off on every little transaction. We are trying to build an empire here. Jade, you don't know how to do that. You analyze risks, you don't take them." "I know enough to recognize a bad deal when I see one," I said. "If I sign this, I am effectively an allowance child again. I lose my autonomy. And knowing your track record with money, Lucas, that 60% would be gone in 5 years. "How dare you?" Victoria interjected, her voice trembling. She reached for her wine glass, her hand shaking just enough to cause the red liquid to ripple. "We are your parents. Well, I am your mother. Do you really think we would steal from you?" "This hurts me. Jade, it truly hurts me that you have become so cynical." "It is not cynicism, Mother," I said. "It is math, and the math doesn't work." "Jade, please," she said, switching tactics instantly. She leaned forward, her eyes wide and wet. "Look at you. You are exhausted. I can see it. You have dark circles under your eyes. You are working yourself to death at that job. You are alone in this big city. It is too much for one girl. $1 billion is a curse, not a blessing. Let us carry the weight for you. We just want you to be happy. We want you to be safe." "I am safe," I said. "Are you—" Lucas leaned forward, his elbows on the table. The fake warmth was gone now. In its place was something harder, something ugly. "Because that is not what we hear. We hear you are unraveling." I narrowed my eyes. "Excuse me." Sterling cleared his throat. He reached into his briefcase again. This time, he did not pull out a contract. He pulled out a manila folder. It looked old. It looked official. "Miss Ellison," Sterling said, his tone shifting from advisor to adversary, If you refuse to sign the voluntary agreement, the family will be forced to take alternative measures to ensure the assets are protected. Given your recent history. My recent history involves a promotion and a 20% raise, I said. What are you talking about? We are talking about your mental state, Lucas said, a sneer curling his lip. We know about the episodes, the depression, the paranoia. I don't have episodes, I said. Don't you? Victoria whispered, looking down at the table as if ashamed on my behalf. Jade, honey, we have seen the signs, the isolation, refusing to see your family, the erratic behavior at the funeral, and we have spoken to people at your office. My blood ran cold. The rumors, the blind items on the socialite blogs, the whispers I had felt behind my back at Vortexia. It wasn't just petty gossip. It was a foundation. They were laying the groundwork for a legal siege. We have affidavits, Sterling said. Tapping the manila folder. Statements from colleagues who claim you have been withdrawn, aggressive, and exhibiting signs of severe emotional distress. We have a preliminary evaluation from a psychiatrist, a very respected one, who has reviewed your behavior and believes you are suffering from a break in reality triggered by grief. That is absurd, I said, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. I have never met this psychiatrist. You cannot diagnose someone you haven't met. In emergency situations, the court can grant a temporary conservatorship based on the evidence provided by immediate family, Sterling said. It is called an ex parte hearing. We could file tomorrow. If the judge agrees that you are a danger to yourself or your estate, control will be transferred to your next of kin immediately, for your own good. I stared at them. They were threatening to Britney Spears me. They were threatening to strip me of my civil rights, my financial freedom, and my dignity, all under the guise of parental concern. They would drag me into a courtroom, paint me as a hysterical, unstable woman who couldn't be trusted with a checkbook, and they would appoint themselves as my guardians. It was the ultimate gaslight. If I got angry, it proved I was unstable. If I cried, it proved I was fragile. If I fought back, it proved I was paranoid. You would do that? I asked softly, looking at my mother. You would tell a judge I am crazy just to get the money. Victoria wiped a tear from her cheek. I would do whatever it takes to save you from yourself. Jade, if you sign the trust agreement, we don't have to go down that road. We can keep this private. No courts, no public records. No one has to know about your condition. It was extortion. Plain and simple. Sign the papers and give us 60%. Or we destroy your reputation and take 100%. Lucas sat back, looking satisfied. He thought he had played the ace. He thought the fear of public humiliation would make me fold. He looked at me with a smug confidence, the look of a man who believes he is the smartest person in the room. I looked at the folder of fake medical records. I looked at Sterling, the architect of this fraud, and then I looked at Lucas. I took a sip of my water. I set the glass down with a deliberate clink on the coaster. That is a very compelling strategy, I said, my voice steady, devoid of the emotion they were desperate to provoke. A conservatorship, very Hollywood, very dramatic. It is not a strategy, Jade, Lucas said. It is reality. Speaking of reality, I said, turning my body slightly to face him directly. I have a question about yours. What? Lucas frowned. $50 million, I said. The room went still, the kind of stillness that happens right before a car accident. I am sorry, Lucas said, blinking. $50 million, I repeated, enunciating every syllable. That is the current principal balance of your outstanding liabilities, isn't it? I am not talking about the mortgages on the houses you can't sell. I am talking about the private notes, the ones held by a syndicate in Las Vegas. Lucas's face went from flush to a terrifying shade of gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I believe the payment is due next Tuesday, I continued, speaking casually, as if discussing the weather. And from what I understand, these are not the kind of creditors who accept payment plans. They are the kind who break kneecaps. Victoria looked at her husband. Lucas, what is she talking about? Lucas did not answer. He couldn't. He was staring at me as if I had just pulled a live grenade out of my purse. You see, I said, leaning forward, I did some reading of my own, while you were paying a doctor to write fake reports about my mental health. I was reading the ledger of your shadow accounts. You aren't trying to protect my inheritance. Lucas, you are trying to use it to save your life. That is a lie, Lucas stammered, sweat breaking out on his forehead. She is delusional. See, this proves it. She is paranoid. Is it a lie? I reached into my bag. I didn't pull out a folder. I pulled out my phone. Because I have the wire transfer records right here, specifically, the ones from your shell company, Lux Horizons, to an account in the Cayman Islands that has been flagged by the FBI for money laundering. I swiped the screen and held it up. It wasn't the wire transfer. It was a photo of Lucas entering a casino in Vegas 3 weeks ago, looking disheveled and frantic. You are not a concerned stepfather, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the room like a razor. You are a desperate gambler who is about to be liquidated, and you brought my mother into this. You convinced her to betray her own daughter because you are terrified of what happens when that deadline hits. Sterling, realizing the ship was sinking, began to gather his papers. Mr. Lucas, you did not inform me of any personal liabilities of this magnitude. Sit down. Richard, I said without looking at him. You are not going anywhere yet. I looked back at Victoria. She was staring at Lucas with horror, not because he had done something wrong, but because she realized the money she thought they were going to steal was already spent. $50 million, I said again to Lucas. You don't want a trust. You want to bail out. Lucas gripped the table. His knuckles were white. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw, naked fear of a man who knows the walls are closing in. You don't know what you are doing, Lucas whispered, his voice shaking. You don't know who these people are. Oh, I think I do, I smiled. But the more important question is, do they know that you are sitting here, trying to steal money that isn't yours, and failing miserably? The silence in the room was no longer the quiet of a library. It was the silence of a tomb. Lucas was gripping the edge of the mahogany table so hard that his knuckles had turned the color of old bone. Victoria was looking back and forth between us, her eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly curdled into panic. Sterling, the lawyer who had been so arrogant moments ago, had closed his laptop and was inching his hand toward his briefcase, looking for an exit strategy. You are bluffing, Lucas whispered. Though his voice lacked any conviction, it was the sound of a man praying that gravity would suddenly stop working. You cannot possibly know that. I told you, Lucas, I said, sliding my phone across the smooth tablecloth until it rested in the center of the setting, right next to the crystal water pitcher. I assess risk for a living. And you are a walking catastrophe. I picked up the remote control for the large, flat-screen television mounted on the wall of the private dining room. It was intended for corporate presentations, for displaying quarterly projections and merger details. Tonight, it would display the autopsy of their deception. Allow me to walk you through the presentation I prepared for this evening, I said, pointing the remote at the screen. I call this The Truth. I tapped the screen mirroring button on my phone. The television flickered to life. The first image was high definition and brutal in its clarity. It was a bank statement, not mine, but Lucas's. Specifically, it was the ledger for Lux Horizons, LLC, the shell company he used to hide his activities. This is the balance sheet for your development company, I narrated, my voice calm and professional. As you can see, the operational capital is 0. However, the liabilities column is fascinating. Here we have 3 separate loans from unlisted private entities in Nevada. The interest rates are daily, not annual. That is usually a sign of organized crime, not organized banking. On the screen, I zoomed in on a transaction dated 3 weeks ago. And here is the wire transfer I mentioned, I said. $500,000 sent to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The FBI flagged this account 6 months ago as a laundering node for an illegal gambling syndicate. You did not invest that money. Lucas, you paid a partial payment to keep them from breaking your legs. Lucas made a sound like a wounded animal. He slumped back in his chair, his face slick with sweat. He looked small. The expensive suit suddenly looked like a costume on a child. But that is just money, I continued, swiping to the next slide. Money can be lost and earned. Character is harder to fix. The screen changed. This time, it displayed a medical report. It was stamped with the logo of the Northwestern Medicine System. The date was from 2 weeks ago. Victoria gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. You told me you were dying. Mother, I said, turning to look at her. You told me you had a mass. You used the word cancer because you knew it was the one thing that might cut through my defenses. You banked on the fact that I would be too emotional to check. I pointed at the screen. This is your electronic health record. You did go to the doctor 2 weeks ago for a cosmetic consultation, a facelift. To be precise, the only thing the doctor found was that your credit card was declined. Stop it, Victoria shrieked, squeezing her eyes shut. Stop it right now. You have no right that is private. You forfeited your right to privacy when you tried to use a fake terminal illness to extort $1 billion from your daughter, I said. And when you threatened to have me committed to a psychiatric ward based on lies, I swiped again. The screen showed a series of emails between Sterling and a psychiatrist named Dr. Aris. The subject line was Subject J.E. Narrative Construction. And here's the smoking gun for Mr. Sterling, I said. Emails coordinating the fabrication of my medical history. You didn't even examine me. Yet you were ready to testify that I was unstable. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Attempted grand larceny. Medical malpractice. Sterling stood up abruptly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. I am leaving. This meeting is over. I cannot be a party to this recording. You are not going anywhere, I said. Because, as I told you before, I didn't come alone. I pressed a button on my phone. A loud, sharp beep echoed through the room. The heavy oak doors of the onyx room swung open. 2 men walked in. The first was Marcus. He looked exactly as he had at the funeral imposing. Serious and utterly disappointed. He carried a leather portfolio under his arm. The second man was someone they did not know, but someone Sterling clearly recognized. He was tall, thin, with wire-rimmed glasses, and an air of clinical detachment that made him terrifying. Hello, Richard, the thin man said. Sterling went pale. Elias. Who are these people? Victoria hissed, looking frantically between the newcomers and me. You know Marcus, I said, gesturing to my father's lawyer. And this is Elias. He is a forensic accountant and a certified fraud examiner. He is also a special consultant for the district attorney's office on financial crimes. Elias walked to the table and placed a small metallic device in the center. It was a digital recorder. The red light was already blinking. This conversation has been recorded in its entirety, Elias said, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. Under Illinois law, recording a private conversation usually requires 2-party consent. However, there is an exception when the recording is made to obtain evidence of a criminal act, specifically extortion and fraud. Given the threats made by Mr. Lucas regarding the conservatorship and the blackmail inherent in the trust proposal, this recording is admissible in court. Extortion, Lucas squeaked. We were just negotiating. You threatened to use a fabricated medical diagnosis to strip Miss Ellison of her civil rights unless she transferred $1.2 billion to your control, Marcus said, his voice booming. That is not negotiation. Lucas, that is a felony, and with the evidence Jade has just displayed regarding your debts, the motive is irrefutable. Marcus stepped forward and dropped a stack of papers on the table, right on top of the Montblanc pen. These are cease and desist orders, Marcus said, and draft complaints for the Bar Association regarding Mr. Sterling's conduct. Sterling was already packing his briefcase, his hands shaking. I was acting on client instructions. I had no knowledge of the specific intent to defraud. "Save it for the disciplinary hearing, Richard," Marcus said. "Your emails say otherwise." I stood up. The chair felt light. My body felt light. For the first time in years, the weight of their expectations, their judgment, and their manipulation was gone. I looked at the contract they had wanted me to sign, the Family Preservation Trust. I picked it up. The paper felt thick and expensive. "You wanted me to sign this," I said to my mother. "You wanted me to give you everything my father worked for. You wanted me to pay for your mistakes." "Jade, please," Victoria whispered. She was crying now. But these were not the pretty, theatrical tears she had used before. These were ugly, messy tears of ruin. "We are desperate. They will kill him. If Lucas doesn't pay, they will kill him." Then he should have thought about that before he borrowed money from criminals to pretend he was a tycoon. I said. I took the contract in both hands. I stared at the signature line where my name was supposed to go. "My father told me that money doesn't change people. It unmasks them," I said. "Thank you for taking off your masks tonight. It makes my decision very easy." I ripped the contract in half. The sound of tearing paper was louder than a gunshot in the quiet room. I put the halves together and ripped them again, and again. I tore the document until it was nothing but confetti. I let the pieces flutter down onto the pristine white tablecloth, covering the untouched crystal and the cold silver. "There is not going to be a trust," I said. "There is not going to be an allowance. There is not going to be a payout." I looked at Lucas. "You are on your own with your creditors. I suggest you sell the house, the cars, and the jewelry. It won't be enough to cover $50 million, but it might buy you a head start." I looked at Victoria. "And you? You wanted a relationship. This is it. This is the last interaction we will ever have." "You can't do this," Victoria screamed, the mask falling away completely. Her face twisted into a snarl that made her look like a stranger. "I gave birth to you. I raised you. You owe me. You ungrateful, cold-hearted little brat. You are just like him. You are just like your miserable, selfish father." The insult hung in the air. She meant it to hurt. She meant it to sting. But to me, it sounded like a benediction. "Thank you," I said, smiling, a real smile. "Being like Arthur Ellison is the greatest compliment you could ever give me." I turned to Marcus. "Do you have the papers?" Marcus nodded and pulled a folder from his portfolio. He handed 2 copies to the terrified waiter who was hovering by the door, signaling him to place them on the table. "These are temporary restraining orders," I said. "They are effective immediately. If you attempt to contact me, approach my home, come to my workplace, or mention my name in the press again, you will be arrested. The distance is 500 meters. I suggest you learn to measure it carefully." "You are sending your own mother to prison," Victoria spat. "No," I said. "You sent yourself to prison the moment you tried to steal my identity. I'm just filing the paperwork." I grabbed my purse. I looked around the room one last time. The luxury, the velvet, the smell of truffles and wine. It all looked so cheap now. It looked like a stage set for a bad play that had finally been canceled. "Marcus, Elias, let's go," I said. We turned to leave. As I reached the door, I paused. I turned back to the table where my mother and stepfather sat amidst the ruins of their scheme. Lucas had his head in his hands. Victoria was staring at me with hate burning in her eyes. I signaled the waiter. "Excuse me," I said. "Yes, Miss Ellison?" the waiter asked, his voice trembling. "My party and I did not eat," I said, gesturing to the untouched seafood towers and the open bottle of vintage Bordeaux. But these two seemed to have enjoyed the ambiance. I pointed to Lucas. "Please bring the check to the gentleman in the tan suit. Make sure to include the gratuity. I believe he insists on only the best service." "Jade," Lucas shouted, standing up. "I don't have any money on me. You can't leave us with this bill." "Consider it an investment lesson," I said. "Always check your liquidity before you order." I walked out of the onyx room and into the corridor. The heavy doors swung shut behind me, muffling the sound of my mother's screaming. I walked through the main dining room, past the couples murmuring over candlelight, past the business deals being made over scotch. I walked out into the cool, biting air of the Chicago night. Marcus and Elias fell into step beside me. "That was intense," Marcus said, adjusting his coat. "Are you okay, Jade?" I took a deep breath. The air smelled of exhaust and rain and the lake, but to me, it smelled like oxygen. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring. I wasn't wondering what they were plotting. "I am fine," I said. "Actually, Marcus, I am better than fine." I looked up at the skyscrapers piercing the night sky. Somewhere up there, in the stars or the ether. I hoped my dad was watching. I hoped he saw that I didn't just protect the money. I protected the girl he raised. "So," Elias said, checking his watch, "what is the next step?" "We have enough for a criminal referral to the FBI, but the state charges might be faster." "We do both," I said. "But first, I am hungry." "Hungry?" Marcus laughed. "After all that, I never got to eat dinner," I said, "and I know a place that makes a really good cheeseburger. It is greasy, cheap, and the tables are made of plastic." "Sounds terrible," Marcus said, smiling. "Your father would have loved it." "Yes," I said. "He would have." We walked down the street, away from the gilded cage, away from the fake warmth of a family that never existed, and into the cold, clean reality of the life I was finally free to build. I thought walking out of the gilded cage was the end of the chapter. But I was wrong. It was simply the intermission before the third act, and the genre had shifted from family drama to survival horror. You would think that being exposed as frauds, faced with forensic evidence, and slapped with a restraining order would make rational people retreat. But desperation is a potent drug, and Lucas and Victoria were overdosing on it. They were $50 million in the hole with people who solved problems with tire irons. They had nothing left to lose, and that made them more dangerous than ever. The counterattack began 48 hours after the dinner. I was sitting at my desk at Vortexia, finalizing a report on seismic risks in the Pacific Rim. When my screen blinked, it wasn't a glitch. It was a rhythmic, pulsing blackout. Then, a red dialog box appeared, "Access denied, system lockdown initiated." "What the?" I muttered, typing in my admin credentials. Nothing. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my bank. "Alert: unusual activity detected. Multiple wire transfer attempts initiated from IP addresses in Eastern Europe." Then another buzz. My brokerage account. "Alert: password reset requested." Then my personal email. "Alert: login successful from new device." It was a coordinated, multi-vector cyber assault. They weren't just trying to get in, they were trying to burn the house down. I grabbed my office phone to call IT, but the line was dead. "Mike!" I shouted, running out of my office. Mike, the head of security, was already sprinting down the hallway. "Jade, we are under attack. Someone is brute forcing your specific user node. They are using a botnet. This isn't some kid in a basement. This is professional." "It's them," I said, my voice cold. "They hired a dark web firm." "We are isolating your accounts," Mike said, typing furiously on his tablet. "But they got into your personal cloud before the firewall went up. They are leaking data." "What data?" "Emails, photos, documents, and they are modifying them." I pulled up Twitter on my phone. The hashtag Jade Ellison Exposed was already trending locally. I clicked on it, my stomach dropping. There were screenshots of emails I had supposedly sent to my father, filled with hateful, vitriolic language, mocking his work and wishing him dead. I can't wait until the old man kicks the bucket so I can cash out. One fake email read, "There were photos of me at college parties, harmless photos of a 20-year-old holding a red cup photoshopped to look like I was surrounded by drug paraphernalia." It was a digital assassination. They were painting me as a drug-addicted, patricidal sociopath to destroy my credibility before they made their next legal move. "Kill it," I told Mike. "Shut it all down." "We are trying," Mike said, sweat beading on his forehead. "But once it is on the internet—" He didn't have to finish the sentence. That afternoon, the legal assault began. Lucas made good on his threat. His lawyer, not Sterling, who had likely fled the country, but a new, sleazier attorney named Vance filed an emergency petition for an ex parte conservatorship. They used the hacked and altered emails as evidence of my mental instability. They submitted affidavits from a Dr. Aris, claiming I was suffering from acute paranoid psychosis and was a danger to myself and my assets. They claimed the restraining order I filed was actually a symptom of my delusion that my loving parents were out to get me. It was a terrifyingly effective narrative. To a judge who didn't know the backstory, I looked like a rich girl spiraling out of control. I was on the phone with Marcus, strategizing our defense, when the intercom in my apartment buzzed. "Miss Ellison." The doorman's voice was shaky. "There are police officers here. They say they need to come up." "What for?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "A welfare check," he whispered. "Your mother called 911. She said you texted her a suicide note." My blood ran cold. This was swatting. They were weaponizing the police to force entry into my home, to drag me out in handcuffs for a psychiatric hold if I was hospitalized. Even for 72 hours. Lucas could use that to get emergency temporary control of the trust. "Marcus," I said into the phone. "They are here. Welfare check." "Do not open the door until I'm on speaker," Marcus commanded. "Do not let them in without a warrant. Be calm. Be boring." I took a deep breath. I walked to the door. I smoothed my hair. I looked through the peephole. 2 uniformed officers were standing there, looking tense. I opened the door. "Miss Jade Ellison?" the older officer asked. His hand was resting near his holster. "Yes, officer," I said, my voice steady, polite. "How can I help you?" "We received a call from a concerned family member," he said. "They stated you sent a message indicating self-harm. We need to verify your safety." "I see," I said. "I assure you, I am perfectly fine. I am currently on the phone with my attorney." I held up the phone. "This is Marcus Thorne." "Officers," Marcus's voice boomed from the speaker. "My client is the victim of an ongoing harassment campaign by the caller, Victoria Ellison. We have an active restraining order against her, which she has just violated by making a false police report. I can email you the copy of the order right now." The officer blinked. He looked at me. I was dressed in business casual, standing in a clean apartment, looking completely rational. "We just need to come in and look around. Miss Ellison," the officer said, though his tone had softened. "Just to be sure." "I do not consent to a search without a warrant," I said firmly. "You can see I am unharmed. You can speak to me here, but you are not coming inside." The officer hesitated. He radioed dispatch. After a few tense minutes of hushed conversation, he nodded. "All right, Miss Ellison, we will log this as a false alarm. But if you need help—" "The only help I need is protection from my mother," I said. They left. I locked the door and slumped against it, my legs shaking. That was too close. They were escalating. They weren't just trying to steal the money anymore. They were trying to erase me. "Jade," Marcus said on the phone, "you can't stay there. They know where you live. They are getting desperate. If the police didn't work, they might try something direct." "Direct?" "Lucas owes money to bad people," Marcus said. "If he can't get the money legally, he might try to get it physically. Kidnapping, coercion. You need to get out." "I am not running," I said. "It is not running," Marcus corrected. "It is a tactical relocation. Vortexia has a safe house program for executives under threat. Use it." I packed a bag in 5 minutes, laptop, hard drives, 2 changes of clothes. I didn't take my car. I knew better, but curiosity, that fatal flaw of the analyst, made me check. I went down to the garage. My Volvo was parked in its usual spot. I knelt down and ran my hand along the inside of the rear bumper. There it was. A small, cold, magnetic box. I pulled it off. A GPS tracker. They had been tracking me. They knew every move I made. The dinner, the office, the apartment. I looked at the blinking red light of the tracker. A surge of anger replaced the fear. They were hunting me like an animal. "Okay," I whispered. "You want to play spy games? Let's play." I walked out of the garage and hailed a cab. I directed the driver to a busy train station. I walked through the station and out the other side, hailing a second cab. I did 3 loops around the city to check for tails before heading to the address Mike had texted me. The safe house was a nondescript brownstone in a quiet neighborhood on the north side. No doorman, no lobby, just a reinforced steel door and bulletproof glass. Inside, it looked like a bunker disguised as an Airbnb. Mike met me there. He had a team of 3 private security contractors with him, ex-military, big guys who didn't smile. "We swept the place," Mike said. "It is clean, no bugs. Secure comms line is set up in the study." "Did you trace the hack?" I asked, dropping my bag on the sofa. "We are working on it," Mike said. "The botnet is Russian, but the payment trail. We found something interesting. The hackers were paid in Bitcoin. We traced the wallet." "Let me guess," I said. "Lucas?" "Not directly," Mike said. "But the wallet was funded by a liquefied asset sale. Specifically, a jewelry store in the Loop bought a large quantity of diamonds from a Victoria E. 2 days ago. The cash was deposited into a crypto ATM an hour later. She sold her diamonds to pay hackers to destroy her daughter," I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "That is dedication." "We have enough for a criminal complaint on the cyberstalking," Mike said. "But the conservatorship hearing is tomorrow morning. If the judge grants it, even temporarily, they freeze your assets. You won't be able to pay us. You won't be able to pay Marcus. That is their plan," I said. "Choke off the resources." I sat down at the secure terminal in the study. I opened the file I had built. The gambling debts, the fake cancer, the restraining order, and now, the GPS tracker which I had handed to Mike for fingerprinting and the crypto trail. "Marcus," I said, calling him on the secure line. "Tomorrow at the hearing, we don't just defend, we attack. I am drafting the motion to dismiss," Marcus said. "But we need something that links Lucas directly to the physical threat. The judge might see the hacking as family squabbling, it happens. We need proof of intent to harm." "I think I can get it," I said. "How?" "The GPS tracker," I said. "It is an active device. It is sending data to a receiver. Someone is watching that dot." "Jade, don't do anything stupid," Marcus warned. "I am not going to do anything stupid," I said, looking at the blinking dot on Mike's monitor where we had isolated the tracker's signal frequency. "I am going to give them exactly what they want." I turned to Mike. "Can we clone the signal of the tracker?" Mike looked at me, intrigued. "Yeah, we can spoof it. Make the receiver think the device is moving when it is actually sitting here." "Good," I said. "I want you to make the tracker look like it is moving. I want you to send it to a specific location, somewhere isolated, somewhere Lucas would feel comfortable making a move." "You are setting a trap," Mike said. "No," I said. "I am setting a stage. If Lucas thinks I am hiding in a warehouse district in the middle of the night, and he shows up with his friends to collect me, well, that is kidnapping, isn't it?" "It is dangerous," Mike said. "I won't be there," I said. "But your drones will be—" "We record him. We record his intent. We record him breaking down the door looking for me. We play that video for the judge tomorrow morning." Mike grinned. It was a sharp, predatory grin. "I like it." We spent the next 6 hours setting up the sting. We chose an abandoned industrial park that Vortexia owned, technically private property, so we could legally film everything. Mike programmed the spoofed GPS signal to travel from the city to the warehouse, then stop. At 2:00 a.m., the bait was taken. On the monitor in the safe house, we watched the drone feed. A black SUV pulled up to the warehouse gates. Two men got out. One was large, wearing a hoodie. The other was Lucas. He was holding a tire iron. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched my stepfather, the man who had sat at dinner tables with me, the man who had promised to protect me, smash the lock on the gate. "Are we recording?" I whispered. "In 4K, Mike said. They moved toward the building. Lucas was shouting, "Jade, come out. We know you are here. Don't make this hard." The thug with him kicked open the side door. They stormed in. 10 minutes later, they stormed out, empty-handed and furious. Lucas smashed the side mirror of the SUV with the tire iron in a fit of rage. "That," Mike said, pausing the frame on Lucas holding the weapon. His face twisted in violence. "Is the ball game." I looked at the screen. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The man on the screen was a monster, but he was a monster I had defeated. "Send the file to Marcus," I said, "and send a copy to the FBI. "What about you?" Mike asked. "You should get some sleep." "I can't sleep," I said. "I have a court hearing in 5 hours, and I need to look perfect." I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked in the mirror. The girl looking back was tired. Yes, her eyes were shadowed, but there was no fear left in them. They had tried to hack me. They had tried to gaslight me. They had tried to swat me. And finally, they had tried to hunt me down with a tire iron. They were wounded animals, thrashing in the dark, and tomorrow, I was going to put them out of their misery. The transition from victim to operative is not a sudden metamorphosis. It is a cold, calculated slide into a different state of being. After the incident at the warehouse, where I watched my stepfather smash a tire iron against a door he thought I was hiding behind, the local police were ready to make an arrest for attempted assault, but the Federal Bureau of Investigation had a different idea. I was sitting in a sterile conference room in the Chicago field office, a stark contrast to the plush velvet of the gilded cage. Across from me sat Agent Rossi, a man with tired eyes and a suit that had seen better days, and Elias, my forensic accountant, who looked like a kid in a candy store amidst the federal resources. "The video from the warehouse is compelling," Agent Rossi said, tapping a stylus against his tablet. "It gives us attempted assault and menacing. But Mr. Lucas is a small fish in a very dirty pond. The cyber attack on your company, the wire fraud, the money laundering through the crypto exchanges, that's what we need. And to get it, we need him to incriminate himself completely. We need him to make the case against himself." Elias slid a piece of paper across the metal table. "We found something else. Jade, while digging through the dark web servers that hosted the botnet attack, we found a loan file." "Another one?" I asked, rubbing my temples. "Not just a loan," Elias corrected. "A collateral agreement. Lucas is trying to borrow $20 million from a shadow banking syndicate based in Macau. The collateral he's offering isn't his. It's the future distributions of the Ellison Trust." I stared at the document. A forgery. Of course, my name was on it. It claimed Jade Ellison had authorized Lucas as my agent to secure funding against my inheritance. "He's turning me into leverage," I said, my voice flat. "He is desperate," Rossi said. "The $50 million he owes to the Vegas group is due in 48 hours. If he doesn't pay, he is a dead man. He is trying to use this Macau loan to pay off the Vegas loan. It is a Ponzi scheme of debt." "So, what do?" I asked. "We let him think he has won," Rossi said. "He needs your signature on a specific power of attorney document to release the funds from Macau. The lenders are criminal, but they are bureaucratic criminals. They want wet ink." "You want me to sign it?" I asked. "No." Rossi shook his head. "We want you to agree to sign it. We want you to walk into his office, wear a wire, and get him to admit 2 things. 1, that he hired the hackers to destroy your reputation. 2, that he forged your signature on the preliminary loan documents. Once we have that on tape, we take down the whole operation, Lucas, Victoria, the hackers, and potentially the domestic contacts for the loan sharks." It was a dangerous play. It meant walking back into the lion's den, not with a restraining order, but with a white flag. "I'll do it," I said. The preparation took 3 hours. They fitted me with a recording device that was no larger than a button, sewn into the collar of my blouse. A second device was taped to the small of my back. They coached me on the narrative. I had to be broken. I had to be the terrified daughter who couldn't take the pressure anymore. I made the call from the safe house. "Hello?" Victoria's voice answered on the first ring. She sounded tense, sharp. "Mom." I let my voice crack. I forced a tremor into my breath. "Mom, please, I can't do this anymore." "Jade." Her tone shifted instantly. It was the predator sensing blood. "Where are you?" "The police said you weren't at your apartment." "I'm hiding," I sobbed. "I saw the news, the photos. Everyone hates me. My boss put me on administrative leave. I can't fight you and the world at the same time." Silence on the other end. I could practically hear her smiling. "Oh, sweetheart," she cooed, the victory dripping from every syllable. I told you it was too much for you. You are spiraling. We just want to help you." "I just want it to stop," I said. "I want the hackers to stop. I want the police to stop. If I sign the papers, will you make it stop?" "Of course, darling," she said soothingly. "That is all we ever wanted, to protect you, to take this burden off your shoulders." "Okay," I whispered. "Tell me where to go." "Come to Lucas's office," she said. "The one in the West Loop. Come now. We will have everything ready. We can end this nightmare today." "Okay," I said. "I'm coming." I hung up. I looked at Agent Rossi, who gave me a thumbs up. "Oscar-worthy," he said. I didn't feel like an actor. I felt like bait. Lucas's office was located in a renovated loft building that screamed new money. It had exposed brick walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, and modern art that looked like it had been bought by the square foot. But as I walked in, I noticed the details that betrayed the illusion. The reception desk was empty. The phones were silent. There were no employees. It was a ghost ship sailing on an ocean of debt. Victoria and Lucas were waiting for me in the main conference room. Lucas looked manic. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled, and his eyes were darting around the room. Victoria looked perfectly put together, the grieving mother ready to welcome the prodigal daughter back into the fold. "Jade," Victoria rushed forward to hug me. I let her. I stood stiff in her arms, feeling the wire taping against my skin. "I'm sorry," I mumbled into her shoulder. "I'm so sorry." "Shh," she patted my hair. "It is okay. You are safe now." She led me to the chair. Lucas was already pushing a stack of documents toward me. "We don't have much time," Lucas said, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. "The banks close in 2 hours. We need to get this notarized and faxed." I sat down. I looked at the papers. General durable power of attorney. It gave Lucas full control over my assets, my accounts, and my legal decisions. It was a financial death warrant. "I need water," I said, my voice shaky. "Please, get her water," Lucas snapped at Victoria. Victoria glared at him but went to the mini-fridge in the corner. "Lucas," I said, looking at him with wide, fearful eyes. "If I sign this, the bad things will stop, the emails, the photos." "Everything stops," Lucas said, tapping the pen against the table. "I handle everything. You go back to your condo. You take a vacation. We clean up the mess." "Did you really have to do it?" I asked, a tear slipping down my cheek. "The photos of me with the drugs, my boss saw them. He thinks I am an addict." Lucas let out a short, harsh laugh. "You left us no choice, Jade. We had to show you that you couldn't survive on your own. We had to break you to fix you." "Who did it?" I asked. "It was so professional." "Top tier," Lucas bragged, his ego getting the better of his caution. "A group out of St. Petersburg. Cost me a fortune in Bitcoin. But it was worth every penny to get you to this chair." I felt the device on my collar hum slightly. Confession 1. Hiring the hackers. And the doctor, I looked at Victoria as she set the water down. Dr. Aris. He said I was crazy. He never even met me. Victoria sat down next to me, taking my hand. Doctor, Aris is a friend. He understands that sometimes the diagnosis needs to fit the solution. We paid him for his time. Of course, $50,000 is a small price to pay to ensure your safety. Confession 2. Bribing the witness and medical fraud. I took a sip of the water. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore, from adrenaline. I needed one more thing. I needed the link to the forgery. I'm scared about the money, I said, looking at the power of attorney document. There is so much of it. What if I already messed it up? I got a notification from a bank in Macau about a loan. Lucas froze. He looked at me sharply. What notification? An email. I lied. It said something about a collateral agreement for $20 million. It said I signed it last week, but I didn't sign it. Lucas, did someone steal my identity? Lucas exchanged a look with Victoria. He licked his lips. He was so close to the finish line. He needed me to sign this POA to legitimize that loan. If he denied it, I might get suspicious and leave. If he admitted it, he thought he was just comforting a confused girl. Don't worry about that, Lucas said, his voice dropping. I handled it. But the signature? I pressed. It looked exactly like mine. It was yours, Lucas said, leaning in. I signed it for you. Consider it an advance. I knew you would agree eventually. Jade, I just sped up the process. I signed the letter of intent so we could have the liquidity ready for you today. I did it for you. Confession 3. Forgery and bank fraud. So, I said, my voice suddenly steadying. You signed my name on a $20 million loan application without my permission. It is a bridge loan, Lucas shouted, losing patience. Who cares who signed it? It is all going into the family pot anyway. Just sign the damn paper. Jade, we are running out of time. He shoved the power of attorney toward me. He uncapped the pen. It was the same Montblanc from the restaurant. Sign it, Victoria commanded, her voice hard. Stop stalling. Do you want the world to see the rest of those emails? Do you want us to release the medical records? Sign the paper. I picked up the pen. I looked at the nib. I looked at the paper. You know, I said, my voice changing. The tremor was gone. The fear was gone. I sat up straight, rolling my shoulders back. My father used to say that the devil is in the details, but I think he was wrong. I think the devil is in the arrogance. What are you babbling about? Lucas spat. Sign. You admitted to federal crimes, I said conversationally. Wire fraud, cyber stalking, forgery, conspiracy. I am your father, Lucas screamed, slamming his hand on the table. I am the only one saving you. You aren't my father, I said. You are a broke gambler who just confessed to a federal agent. Lucas blinked. What? I smiled. It was the coldest smile I had ever worn. Checkmate, I said. The word hung in the air for exactly 1 second. Then, the floor-to-ceiling windows of the conference room shattered inward. FBI nobody move. It wasn't like the movies. It was louder. Flashbang grenades detonated near the door, filling the room with blinding light and deafening noise. Armed agents in tactical gear swarmed into the room from the hallway entrance, their weapons drawn and leveled. Hands, show me your hands, Lucas screamed. Falling backward out of his chair, he scrambled toward the window, but Agent Rossi was already there, stepping over the broken glass. Lucas Miller, you are under arrest, Rossi shouted, kicking Lucas's legs out from under him and pinning him to the floor. Victoria stood frozen, her mouth open in a silent scream. She looked at me, then at the agents, then back at me. Jade, she whispered, what have you done? I protected the asset, I said, standing up and ripping the wire from my collar. And the asset is me. An agent moved toward Victoria. Victoria Ellison, put your hands behind your back. No, she shrieked, backing away. I didn't do anything. It was him. It was all Lucas. He made me do it. We have you on tape, Mrs. Ellison, I said, watching her crumble. Admitting to the bribery, admitting to the hacking. You are just as guilty as he is. I watched as they cuffed her. The gold bracelets she loved so much clinked against the steel of the handcuffs. She was sobbing now, wailing about how she was a victim, how she was sick, how she was a mother. I walked over to the table. I picked up the power of attorney document. I picked up the Montblanc pen. I wrote void in large, block letters across the signature line. Agent Rossi, I called out. Rossi looked up from where he was reading Lucas his Miranda rights. Here is your evidence, I said, pointing to the document, and I believe he has a flight booked to the Cayman Islands tonight. You might want to check his pocket for the itinerary. Lucas glared at me from the floor, his face pressed against the carpet. You are dead, he hissed. You hear me? You are dead. I don't think so, I said, looking down at him. But your credit score definitely is. Elias walked into the room, stepping carefully over the debris. He was holding a tablet. We got the bank in Macau, Elias said. They just confirmed the receipt of the forged documents, and we have the IP address of the hacker group confirmed. The transfer you made to them. We just froze the wallet. The money is gone. Lucas let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. He knew it was over. The Vegas sharks wouldn't get their money. The Macau bank wouldn't send the funds, and he was going to federal prison. I walked out of the conference room, leaving the chaos behind. I walked into the empty reception area. My legs finally gave out. I sat down on the receptionist's desk, my head in my hands. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving me shaking. You did good, kid, a voice said. I looked up. It was Agent Rossi's partner, a woman named Agent Harper. She handed me a bottle of water. Is it really over? I asked. For them. Harper nodded toward the conference room where Victoria was being led out in cuffs. Yeah, it's over. They are looking at 20 years, minimum, RICO charges, fraud, identity theft. We are throwing the book at them. I watched as 2 agents led my mother past the glass wall. She saw me. She stopped. For a moment, I thought she would scream again. I thought she would curse me. But she just looked at me. And in her eyes, I didn't see anger anymore. I saw a terrifying emptiness. She realized that the ATM machine she had tried to break into was actually a vault, and she had locked herself inside it. She looked away and let them lead her to the elevator. I took a deep breath. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was setting, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and violet. It was beautiful. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number. Fortexia Security, Mike answered. Mike, I said, you can take down the firewall and tell HR I will be in tomorrow morning. I have a report to finish. Copy that, boss, Mike said. Welcome back. I hung up. I wasn't just back at work. I was back in control. The investigation was closed. The trap had sprung, and the hunters had become the prey. The explosion of the tactical breach was not just a sound. It was a physical force that sucked the air out of the room. In the split second after the glass shattered, the office transformed from a quiet den of white-collar crime into a chaotic theater of federal enforcement. Lucas reacted with the desperate, illogical panic of a man who knows his life is over but refuses to read the credits. While Agent Rossi was shouting commands, Lucas scrambled on his hands and knees, not toward the door, but toward the side table where his laptop sat open. He wasn't trying to run. He was trying to purge. He grabbed the computer, his fingers fumbling with the keyboard, likely trying to execute a remote wipe command or delete the encryption keys to his offshore accounts. Drop it. Drop the device, a tactical officer screamed, leveling his rifle. Lucas ignored him. He raised the laptop high above his head and brought it down with a sickening crunch against the corner of the marble conference table. He smashed it once, twice, screaming a guttural, animalistic sound with each blow, sending keys and plastic shards flying across the room. Secure him, Rossi barked. Two agents tackled Lucas before he could land a third strike. The force of the impact drove the breath out of him. I watched, pressed against the back wall, as my stepfather, the man who had worn Italian suits and lectured me on sophistication, was pinned to the plush carpet, his face distorted against the floor, drool and blood from a bitten lip smearing on the expensive wool. "It is encrypted," Lucas shrieked, his voice cracking. "You will never get in. You have nothing." "We have the cloud backups, you idiot," Elias said calmly from the doorway, stepping over a pile of shattered glass. "We mirrored your drive 10 minutes ago when you logged into the office Wi-Fi." Lucas stopped struggling. The fight went out of him all at once, leaving only a limp, heavy dead weight that the agents hauled to his feet. Across the room, Victoria was staging a different kind of performance. She wasn't fighting. She was collapsing. She had backed herself into a corner, clutching her Chanel bag to her chest like a shield, when an agent approached her with handcuffs. She let out a wail that pierced through the shouting. "I didn't know," she screamed, her eyes darting frantically toward me. "Jade, tell them, I didn't know. He forced me. I am a victim here. I am a battered wife." It was a pivot so fast, it would have given a lesser person whiplash. Minutes ago, she had been commanding me to sign my life away. Now, she was playing the role of the coerced spouse, the innocent bystander caught in her husband's web. "We have you on audio tape, Mrs. Ellison," Agent Rossi said, his voice cutting through her hysteria. "We heard you instructing the victim to sign. We heard you confirming the payment to the hackers. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." "No, you can't do this. Do you know who I am?" Victoria sobbed. But she turned around. The click of the handcuffs ratcheting shut around her wrists was the most satisfying sound I had heard in a decade. "Jade," she yelled as they began to march her out. "Jade, look at me. How can you do this to your own mother? I carried you. I gave you life." I stepped forward. The room went quiet for a heartbeat. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, the woman who had traded my childhood for a country club membership and tried to trade my future for a gambling debt. "You gave me life," I said, my voice steady and cold. "And then you tried to sell it. Now, I am taking it back." I nodded to Rossi. "Take them away." The procession out of the building was not accidental. In the hour leading up to the sting, while I was getting wired up, I had made one other call. I had contacted the assignment editors of the 3 biggest news stations in Chicago, and the crime reporters for the Tribune and the Sun-Times. I told them that the FBI was executing a raid on a high-profile financial fraud ring involving a prominent real estate developer and a socialite. I knew Victoria's greatest fear was not prison. It was irrelevance. It was embarrassment. So I ensured her exit would be the most publicized event of the season. As the agents led Lucas and Victoria out of the elevator and into the lobby, the flashbulbs erupted like a lightning storm. The press was waiting. They captured every detail: Lucas's torn shirt and bleeding lip, Victoria's mascara-stained cheeks, the handcuffs glinting under the harsh television lights. "Mrs. Ellison, is it true you tried to defraud your daughter?" "Mr. Lucas? Where is the $50 million? Are you involved in the cartel money laundering scheme?" The questions were shouted like accusations. Victoria tried to hide her face, ducking her head, but there was nowhere to hide. The image of the perfect family she had curated on Instagram for years was shattered in high definition. I stood in the back of the lobby, obscured by the shadow of a pillar, and watched. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just witnessed the inevitable consequence of gravity. What goes up on a foundation of lies must come down. While the police vans sped away, sirens wailing, the second phase of the operation was taking place 30 miles north in Lake Forest. Agent Harper called me from the scene an hour later. I was sitting in the back of an unmarked bureau car, sipping lukewarm coffee, waiting to give my formal statement. "Jade," Harper said, and her voice was grim. "We are at the residence. It is extensive." "What did you find?" I asked. "We found the go bags packed in the master closet," Harper said. "Passports, cash, gold bars. They were ready to run tonight if you didn't sign. But that is not the big headline. What is? We found a safe in the basement. Harper continued. Lucas cracked under questioning in the transport van and gave us the combination. Jade, it wasn't just you. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? We found files, Harper said. Dozens of them. It looks like Lucas and Victoria have been running confidence scams for years. We found identity documents for elderly investors in Florida. We found forged deeds for properties that don't exist. We found life insurance policies taken out on employees of Lucas's shell companies without their knowledge. I closed my eyes. I had thought I was the primary target, the whale they wanted to harpoon, but I was just the biggest fish in a net full of minnows. They were not just bad parents. They were career predators. The realization washed away the last lingering speck of guilt I might have felt. I hadn't just saved myself. I had stopped a crime spree that had likely destroyed dozens of other lives. And the children, I asked quietly. Mia and Ethan. There was a pause on the line. They were home when we breached, Harper said softly. They saw everything. They saw the agents tearing apart the house. They saw the evidence bags coming out. I could picture it. 2 teenagers, standing in their pajamas in the hallway of a mansion that was built on stolen money, watching their world dissolve. Where are they now? I asked. Child Protective Services is on site, Harper said. We contacted Lucas's sister in Ohio. She is driving down to take custody. They are safe. Jade? Scared, but safe. Do they need anything? The question came out automatically. Money, a lawyer. Jade, Harper said, her voice firm. Stop. You are the victim here. You cannot save everyone. Especially not the children of the people who tried to destroy you. If you get involved, you blur the lines. Let the system handle it. She was right. Arthur would have said the same thing. You cannot fix a broken house by painting the walls. I had to let them go. Their tragedy was not my inheritance. By the next morning, the fallout was nuclear. The headlines were brutal. Socialite scandal. Mother arrested for extortion of tech heiress. Real estate. Tycoon linked to Macau syndicate. The internet, which had been weaponized against me just 48 hours earlier, swung its massive, fickle pendulum in the opposite direction. The hashtag Jade Ellison exposed was replaced by Justice for Jade. The comment sections were filled with people dissecting Victoria's old posts, pointing out the inconsistencies, the lies, the fake displays of wealth. Her friends, the women she lunched with, the board members of her charities were giving interviews distancing themselves, claiming they always suspected something was off. It was a total social erasure. Victoria didn't just lose her freedom, she lost her audience. And for a narcissist, that is a fate worse than death. The final nail in the coffin came at 10 o'clock in the morning at the Cook County Courthouse. I sat in the front row of the courtroom, flanked by Marcus and Elias. The hearing was supposed to be for the emergency conservatorship petition Lucas had filed. The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked at the empty defense table. Lucas and Victoria were not there. They were in federal holding cells awaiting arraignment. Their lawyer, Vance, looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Mr. Vance, the judge said, her voice icy, I have read the filing from your clients regarding Miss Ellison's alleged incapacity. I have also read the briefing from the FBI regarding your client's arrest for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy related to this very petition. Your Honor, Vance stammered, sweating profusely. I was unaware of the criminal aspects. I am moving to withdraw as counsel immediately. Motion granted, the judge snapped. And Mr. Vance, I am referring your conduct to the Ethics Board for review. Filing a conservatorship petition based on fabricated medical evidence is a career-ending move in my courtroom. She turned her gaze to me. Her expression softened. Miss Ellison, she said, the petition for conservatorship is dismissed with prejudice. It will never be refiled. Furthermore, based on the evidence provided by the federal prosecutor, I am issuing a permanent order of protection for you against both defendants. They are to have no contact with you, directly or indirectly, for life. Thank you, Your Honor, I said, standing up. And Miss Ellison, the judge added, I am sorry you had to go through this. The law is designed to protect families, but sometimes it has to protect us from families. I nodded. I walked out of the courtroom, the heavy oak doors closing behind me with a solid, final thud. Marcus put a hand on my shoulder. It is done. Jade, the civil threat is gone. The criminal case is a slam dunk. The prosecutor says they are looking at 20 to 30 years. They will likely plead out to 15 to avoid a public trial. 15 years, I repeated. I would be 44 years old when they got out, a whole lifetime away. What do you want to do? Marcus asked. We can go to lunch. Celebrate. No, I said. I just want to go for a drive. I walked out to the curb where my car, my sturdy, reliable Volvo that they had tried to track, was waiting. I had swept it for bugs myself that morning. I got in and shut the door. The sound of the city was muffled instantly. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. I expected to feel triumphant. I expected to feel a surge of joy, but I didn't. I felt light. It was a strange sensation, like taking off a heavy backpack you didn't realize you had been wearing for a decade. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest since the funeral was gone. The voice in the back of my head that wondered if I was good enough, if I was safe enough, if I was loved enough, it was silent. I looked out the window, across the street. A group of teenagers were laughing, walking toward the park. A couple was arguing over where to eat lunch. Life was happening, normal and messy and real. I started the engine. I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove. I drove toward the lake, toward the open water where the horizon stretched out forever. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced at it. It was a notification from my bank app. Direct deposit received Vortexia Dynamics payroll. It wasn't $1 billion. It was my salary, the money I earned. The money that belonged to me, not to a trust, not to a legacy, but to Jade. I smiled. For the first time, the future didn't look like a fortress I had to defend. It looked like a wide-open road. I merged onto Lakeshore Drive, the city rising behind me like a glittering canyon of steel and glass. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was free. And as the speedometer climbed, I whispered the words my father had written in his letter. The words that had saved me. Build something real. I will, Dad, I said to the empty car. I will. The wheels of justice turn slowly. Or so the saying goes. But when you have the Federal Bureau of Investigation and a forensic accounting team that has documented every single cent of a criminal enterprise, those wheels tend to grind with a terrifying efficiency. 6 months after the raid that shattered the glass walls of Lucas's office, I found myself walking up the granite steps of the federal courthouse. The air was crisp, the kind of sharp Chicago autumn day that my father used to love. I wore a suit, but it was not the armor I had worn to the gilded cage. It was softer, lighter. I did not need armor anymore. The monsters under my bed had been dragged out into the daylight, and they looked much smaller in the harsh fluorescent glare of courtroom 402. I sat in the witness stand, my hands folded on the railing. I looked out at the defense table. Lucas and Victoria sat as far apart as the space allowed. They were dressed in civilian clothes, but the fit was wrong. Lucas's suit hung loosely on a frame that had lost 20 pounds from stress and prison food. Victoria wore a gray cardigan that made her look like a librarian, a calculated attempt to look harmless, but the jury did not see a harmless librarian. They saw the woman I had described for the past 3 hours. I testified with a clinical precision that would have made Arthur Ellison proud. I did not cry. I did not shout. I simply laid out the data points of their betrayal, the fake cancer diagnosis, the hacking, the forgery, the psychological warfare. Victoria's defense attorney, a public defender who looked exhausted before the day even began, tried to execute the only strategy he had left. He tried to paint Victoria as a victim. "Miss Ellison," he said, pacing in front of the jury box, Is it not true that your stepfather, Lucas Miller, was the one with the gambling debts? Is it not true that he was the one who hired the hackers? Your mother was simply a frightened woman, manipulated by a domineering husband, terrified for her safety and yours. She went along with his schemes because she felt she had no choice. I looked at Victoria. She had her head bowed, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. She was committing to the role of the battered wife, the pawn in a man's game. It was a good narrative. It might have even worked, except for the fact that I had the tapes. That is an interesting theory, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. But the evidence suggests otherwise. I nodded to the prosecutor, who queued up Exhibit 4B. The courtroom speakers crackled to life. It was the recording from the wire I had worn during the sting operation, but it wasn't the part where Lucas confessed. It was a segment the jury hadn't focused on yet. Lucas's voice recording. I don't know, Vic. Maybe we should just ask her for a loan. If we push too hard, she might snap. Victoria's voice recording. Don't be weak. Lucas, asking gets us nothing. We have to break her. She is just like her father. She is stubborn and emotionally stunted. If we don't scare her, she won't sign. I don't care if she cries. I don't care if she ends up in a psych ward. Just get the signature so we can access the Capitol. The silence that followed the recording was absolute. The frightened victim narrative evaporated instantly. The jury looked at Victoria not with pity, but with revulsion. She wasn't a pawn. She was the architect. Victoria finally looked up. Her eyes met mine. There was no love there, no regret, just the cold, hard stare of a business partner who had been outmaneuvered. Mrs. Ellison, I said, addressing her directly from the stand, breaking protocol but capturing the entire room's attention. You never wanted to be a mother. You just wanted to be my fund manager. The judge banged his gavel. But the damage was done. The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later. The judge, a man who had presided over financial crimes for 30 years, did not mince words. He looked at Lucas and Victoria with the disdain one reserves for the lowest form of scavenger. The betrayal of a child by a parent is a moral crime, the judge said, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. But the systematic dismantling of a person's identity and financial security for personal gain is a federal crime. You did not just try to steal money. You tried to steal a life. He turned to Lucas. Lucas Miller, for the counts of wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and money laundering. I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison. You will also be required to pay restitution in the amount of $2 million, representing the funds stolen from various investors. Lucas slumped in his chair. 15 years. He would be an old man when he walked out. The gambling debts, the Vegas sharks, none of that mattered now. He was safe from them, but he was locked in a cage of his own making. Then the judge turned to Victoria. Victoria Ellison, he said. Your counsel argues that you were an accomplice. I find you to be a co-conspirator of the highest order for conspiracy to commit extortion, medical fraud, and cyberstalking. I sentence you to 10 years in federal prison. Victoria gasped. She looked at her lawyer, shocked. She had truly believed that her tears would buy her a lighter sentence. She thought the system worked like her social circles, where charm could cover a multitude of sins. She was wrong. Furthermore, the judge continued, the court orders the immediate seizure of all remaining assets held by both defendants to satisfy the restitution order and legal fees. The Lake Forest property, the vehicles, and the contents of the safe deposit boxes are hereby forfeited. It was a total wipeout. They were leaving the courtroom with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a criminal record that would follow them forever. As the bailiffs moved to take them into custody, Victoria tried one last time. She turned toward the gallery where I was sitting. Jade, she called out, her voice cracking. I am your mother. You can't let them take me. I stood up. I didn't look away. I watched her until the side door closed behind her. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't sadness. It was silence. The noise was finally gone. I walked out of the courthouse and into the sunlight. Marcus was waiting for me. He handed me a cup of coffee. "It is over," he said. "Yes," I replied. "It is." That afternoon, I drove out of the city, away from the noise and the concrete, to the quiet cemetery where my father was buried. It was a simple plot, marked by a granite stone that listed only his name and the dates of his life. No fancy epitaphs, just the facts. The grass was turning brown with the coming winter, but the air smelled clean. I knelt down and placed a copy of the Chicago Tribune on the grave. The headline read, "Final Verdict, Ellison Fraud Ring Dismantled." "You were right, Dad," I whispered, touching the cold stone. "The vultures came, but they didn't get anything." I sat there for a long time, telling him about the trial, about the look on Lucas's face, about the judge. I told him that I hadn't let them make me bitter. I told him that I had protected the one thing he cared about most, not the money, but my own integrity. "Dad is safe now," I said softly, the words feeling heavy and right, and so was I. But safety was not enough. My father had taught me that resources should be used to grow things. I couldn't just sit on the fortune he had left me. I had to plant seeds. In the weeks following the trial, I worked with Marcus to establish the Arthur Ellison Foundation. We didn't build a monument or a building. We built a shield. The foundation was dedicated to providing high-level legal defense and forensic accounting services to victims of familial financial abuse. We set up a hotline for people who were being coerced by parents, spouses, or siblings. We hired a team of lawyers who specialized in trust law and identity theft. We created a scholarship program for students who had been cut off by their families for refusing to be manipulated. It felt right. Every dollar I spent helping someone else escape a trap was a dollar that honored my father's memory. It was the ultimate revenge against Victoria and Lucas. The money they had tried to steal for their greed was now being used to destroy people like them. 6 months after the sentencing, I found myself in a small neighborhood in the Andersonville district. It was a Tuesday. I walked into a diner called the Rusty Spoon. It had vinyl booths that were taped together with duct tape and a menu that was laminated and sticky. It was exactly the kind of place Arthur Ellison would have loved. I sat in a booth by the window. I didn't order the lobster or the truffle risotto. I ordered the cheeseburger, medium well, with extra pickles and a side of onion rings. When it arrived, served in a plastic red basket lined with wax paper. I took a bite. It was greasy. It was salty. It was delicious. I looked out the window at the people walking by. No one knew who I was. To them, I wasn't the billionaire heiress who had sent her parents to prison. I was just a woman eating a burger on a Tuesday. My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at the screen. It was an email. The subject line was simply, "I'm sorry." The sender was Ethan, Lucas's son, my stepbrother. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen. I opened it. "Jade, I don't know if you will read this. I just wanted to say I am sorry. For everything. Dad and Victoria. They were crazy. I see that now. We are living with our aunt in Ohio. It is hard, but we are okay. I just wanted you to know that I don't blame you. You did what you had to do. Ethan." I read it twice. I felt a pang of sympathy for him. He was a victim too. Collateral damage in his father's war. But then I remembered the lesson I had learned. Boundaries are not walls you build to keep people out. They are the lines you draw to keep yourself safe. Ethan was part of a life I had left behind. Opening that door, even a crack, was a risk. I didn't reply. I didn't forward it to Marcus. I pressed the trash icon. Then I went to the deleted folder and pressed empty trash. The email vanished. I took another bite of my burger. It tasted like freedom. I had walked through fire to get here. I had faced down the people who were supposed to love me and realized that love is not a biological obligation. Love is a choice. It is an action. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. I looked at the empty seat across from me. I could almost see my father sitting there, wearing his flannel shirt, smiling that crinkly smile. "Not bad, kid," I imagined him saying. Not bad at all. I wiped my mouth with a paper napkin. I paid the bill with cash. I left a generous tip for the waitress who looked like she was having a long day. Then I walked out of the diner and into the rest of my life. I had lost a fake family to find myself. And that is the cheapest price I have ever paid for freedom worth billions of dollars. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below with your city or country. Let's see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the Healing Drama Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help us share these stories with even more people. Your support means the world to us.